Councillor Coleman? Everyone's okay with the agenda? All those in favor? Opposed and carried. Thank you. Declaration of pecuniary interests. If you have any, please declare them now. Councillor Gatward?
I would like to declare on,
Your microphone, Joan.
I'll let Councilor Bell go first.
Thank you. I'll declare under anything that has to do with the John Noble Home, which I believe is 8E.
Thank you. Councillor Bell?
I will declare under item 13C with regard to Cedar Street.
Thank you. Councillor Gatward?
I would like to declare on,
Your microphone, please. Thank you.
I would like to declare on the Public Works agenda, and it's, I believe, item 5 on the report, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, we're going to go right to number 4 on the agenda, the delegations. Ken Chrysler, you're first. If you could just say your name and your address for the clerk, please.
Ken Chrysler, 54 Dundas Street East, Brant, Ontario.
Microphone, please. Yep, there we go.
Thank you, and on behalf of the Brant Railway Heritage Society, I'm the president, Ken Chrysler, and I'm going to make a proposal here tonight for the development of a railway museum on the County of Brant property at Mount Pleasant Park on Birch Road. The Brant Railway Heritage Society is dedicated to the preservation of Brant County and Brantford Railway history. We are a group of over 40 members from many communities in and around Brant, including Brantford, Paris, St. George, Mount Pleasant, and surrounding areas. Some of our members are from Hamilton, Chatham, Belleville, and even as far away as British Columbia. The beginnings of the society were formed on August of 2018, at first with a Facebook page, and soon followed by an election of an interim board of directors in September of 2018. Since that time, the Society has applied for and received our not-for-profit incorporation through the Ontario Historical Society. We have elected a formal board of directors and officers, ratified a constitution and bylaws, and received our Ontario Corporation number. We have been collecting artifacts and archive materials in preparation for the museum and have begun the restoration of a baggage cart with most materials for that project donated. We now have our insurance and are proceeding with our application for registered charity status with Revenue Canada. We have raised funds in excess of $6,000 so far through membership dues and donations from individuals and businesses, and are ongoing in our efforts regarding fundraising. We have negotiated with the current owner of Mount Pleasant Lake Erie Northern Railway Station, located on private property in the community of Mount Pleasant, to acquire the station, which will be donated to us once our insurance is finalized. We have up to 36 months to rebuild and restore the station at the current location before it must be moved to a permanent location. We have on-site storage and workshop facilities for that period as well. The station is currently derelict and in need of extensive restoration in order to save it. It has a steel construction fence erected around it and has been posted with no trespassing signs to prevent injury through curious members of the public visiting the site. We have commissioned the firm of Tacoma Engineering to assist us in our evaluation and planning to proceed with the restoration of the structure. Tacoma has issued us 2 documents so far to that end: an engineering report of the current state and required restoration, and a document designing our propping system to stabilize the structure through the restoration period. The immediate goal this fall is to install the stabilization and support system outlined in the plan to that effect from Tacoma, and to close in and cover over the structure from the weather before winter. Some details will be removed, such as E-brackets and windows, for evaluation, restoration, and safekeeping until needed. Once this stage has been reached, then further evaluation and careful restoration can begin. We have original Canadian Pacific standard drawings of the station and will be working with a certified architect to design and modernize the restoration in order to meet multi-occupancy requirements. while maintaining a faithful historical representation of the as-built condition of the structure. We've also been contacted by and have met with Dr. Christopher Cooper of the Oedipus Consultancy. Dr. Cooper is an expert in restoration of period buildings and historical structures. He has expressed interest in the structure and has met with us on site. He will assist with evaluation, advice, promotion, and possible reworking of some of the components of the restoration. Several contractors have approached us to donate labor, and some or all materials needed for the project. Coin Roofing has offered free labor and possible materials to re-roof the structure. Grand Electrical Solutions has come forward to donate our electrical needs in the form of free labor and some of the materials needed in that regard. Jean McKenzie has pledged our HVAC needs with labor and part or all of the materials needed. Craig McMillan has offered to look after our excavating and gravel needs, and Don Cardy has pledged all of our outdoor lighting needs. We are ongoing in our efforts to source materials either through donations or through reduced cost. The restoration, however, will demand much custom cut lumber and cedar shingles in order to match existing materials. Vision for our future museum. The Brant Railway Heritage Society has set the goal of a complete, faithful restoration of the Mount Pleasant Lake Erie Northern Railway Station to be used as the nucleus and central focal point of a museum dedicated to preserving the history of railways throughout our region. Once restoration is complete, we would move the station to an agreed-upon site on County of Brant land, placing the building on a full basement foundation, and there develop the site into an attractive museum, whereupon we would manage the facility and care for the structure. The museum would consist of the restored station itself, containing function rooms for displays, meetings, gift shop, library and archives, along with museum offices. Outside the station would be an attractive garden environment with benches and storyboard displays, perhaps an auxiliary building like a handcar shed, some track, and some display items. Ongoing articles and newsletters, essays, and interactive maps would eventually be offered online as well. Documentary-style videos, of which we have already produced one such example, and written books and articles will also be produced. Highlighted will be the human side through stories of people that worked for the railways or depended on them for mail, travel, business, or express packages. Model railway displays depicting various scenes throughout the County of Brant region will be constructed to show how the railways supported growth and day-to-day life, whether it was for personal transportation or for manufactured goods and freight to be shipped or received. The Brant Railway Heritage Museum, Mount Pleasant, in the County of Brant. If we get that other picture, please. Becoming a good neighbor within the community. The museum itself would operate within the community of Mount Pleasant and the County of Brant to enhance education and learning, to pass on a knowledge and love of our heritage through railway history. One way to do this would be to work closely with schools and host class trips to the museum for school-aged children, as well as offering in-class presentations. For the older students, we currently offer credit-required community volunteer hours opportunities, and eventually employment to summer students through government programs set up for such purposes. The Society would also promote County of Brant and Mount Pleasant as a tourist destination. Our preferred museum location would be to put the station as close as possible to the spot it occupied when it was a working station, alongside the Lake Erie Northern Trail at Mount Pleasant Park on Birch Road. This would require a diversion of the trail to pass through the station garden. Light refreshments such as cold drinks, baked goods, etc. could be made available to trail users. The restored station and floral grounds could be made available for wedding photo backdrops, picnics, small group meetings, car shows, special functions, and an annual Brant Railway Heritage Festival at the park for fundraising and promotion purposes. So our request to the County Council, we ask that the Council of the County of Brant enter a working relationship with us where we, the Society, restore, develop, move, maintain, and operate the station and museum on County of Brant land at Mount Pleasant Park on Birch Road. There are several items that we believe the County of Brant may be able to assist with: washroom facilities, installation of services, general site preparation. We ask the County of Brant also to accept donations and issue tax receipts to donors on our behalf until we achieve our registered charity status. And we ask the County of Brant to waive tipping fees at Biggers Lane landfill as we clean the refuse out of the station. On behalf of the Brant Railway Heritage Society, I thank you for your consideration in this matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Are there any questions to Ken? Councillor House.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Ken. First, congratulations on your success in the very first year. I've been monitoring along the way on Facebook and things, and you guys have come a long way quickly. And I went down and had a look, as you know, I had to ask Ken where it was. I do have a couple specific questions from your submission, both related to the consulting engineer side of things. The first is, have they given you any ballpark dollar framework on what all this might cost? You said you've raised about $6,000 so far, and I'll give you the second question, then I'll be quiet and let you answer. The second question is, if this ends up on county property, and I'm not opposed to that, but have you factored in the accessibility elements that would be, I believe anything that's built on county-owned, municipal property has to adhere to some pretty strict accessibility standards, and I just want to know if that's been factored into some of your design thinking.
Well, thank you very much for your questions, and very good questions too. The first question, do we have any idea of what this may cost us? Well, we have 3 years to come up with enough money to get the job done. We think it'll roughly be in the cost of about $250,000, $250,000 to restore the building and then move it. That, of course, all depends on as we get into the building and start taking apart walls and evaluating individual studs and floor joists and just how much of it actually needs to be replaced. So, and then, of course, we have to get about 30,000 cedar shingles custom cut, and other lumbers, a 2x4 in 1916 is 2 inches by 4 inches, and it's not that now, so this all has to be specially cut. So that it just depends on the extent of the actual condition that we can't see that's inside the walls right now. The second part of your question, I'm sorry, could you just refresh me on that one?
Just that I believe that, like, you're proposing that it ends up on county property.
Oh, yeah, the accessibility question, yes. As I stated in the proposal, we are going to be working with an architect to fall under the requirements for multiple use occupancy and accessibility. One thing we do have at the front of the building are 2 baggage doors that slide on rollers, and that's a large opening. So with a platform at the front of the station, it'd be quite easy to have an accessible for wheelchairs or anyone who needs a ramp for a walker or anything like that. So yes.
Thank you. Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and this is more a comment, and you've certainly come a long ways from that meeting we had in Mount Pleasant
Yes.
a couple months ago. So I take my hats off to you for getting this far and whatnot, and I was worried about your plan, but I think things are progressing quite well. So I appreciate your work that you guys are putting into it. Thanks a lot.
Well, thank you. Yeah, we are trying to be very careful about doing justice to this building and to the community.
Councillor Ferrier.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. You have come a long way, because I know our first meeting was actually in Ward 2 about putting it there, and I'm sad it won't be, but I'm happy it looks as a potential for Mount Pleasant. I'm a member of the Railway Society. I've been keeping track of it, but I'm wondering if this site, for whatever reason, does not work out. There has been some talk at Public Council about the Safety Village possibly needing a new site. And I'd like to just talk about two things with that. One is, would you be opposed, if you had to be placed or paired with the Safety Village if it was to move to the county?
A safety village is a natural fit, especially tomorrow night, I believe, in Brantford is held an event where Canadian National is meeting with the public and safety initiatives, road crossing safety and things like that. So that's absolutely a really good fit.
The other question I had related to that is, could you talk a little bit more about the plan potentially to engage schools? Because I could see that as being a very strong public good. When I worked at group homes and section schools, the kids loved going to the railway museums up in north of Waterloo. Would there be opportunities for that to occur, for the school boards to get involved as well?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, we want to work closely with schools, and I'm going to meet with principals and relevant people and talk about any kind of programs that we can help them with. We can come in and do in-class presentations, present videos and artifacts and stories and anecdotes, as well as eventually, when we have a working museum, we'll be able to host class trips coming in.
Wonderful. Keep up the great work.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Ken. Ken, I'm so pleased you're doing this. I think if you just look behind you and you see the pictures there of all the stations, you realise the history of Paris and the county is born on railways. So to have a museum that actually pays tribute to that is an essential. Let me get to a practical question. You've asked the county to assist with washroom facilities, installation of services, and general site preparation. Do you have any sense of how much that amounts to in terms of cost?
As cost, no. I have no idea what that would cost. We haven't even begun to develop that type of factoring in. I was hoping that the county would take that part on themselves and leave us to worry about the station and moving it and operating it. The park currently has a very limited facility, as in like an outhouse kind of thing. We would like to see, what I could like to call, I'm a camper, so I like to call them power johns, like proper washroom facilities set up, accessible. And it's not just for us, it's for the whole park. I mean, there's tennis grounds there, there's a picnic area there, there's a baseball diamond, so something that the whole community can use.
Thank you.
Councillor Gatward. Microphone, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I attended the meeting in Mount Pleasant originally, and the second one, unfortunately, couldn't attend because we had a corporate development committee meeting that night, but there's been a lot of work done since then, and you've raised $6,000 in your first month, which is very good. I wondered, have you got any approval for the actual site that you've indicated up there from, I know you met with the mayor and the CAO about that site. I guess we'd have to refer that to community services to get it approved. It's a very busy park, Mr. Mayor, and I don't see how we could possibly ever squeeze in the safety village. But I think there is room to squeeze in the museum, the railway museum. We do not own the railway lands or the triangle that goes between the railway lands. Those are leased currently to a farmer, but he is willing to not renew that lease. So that's good news, because our former Recreation Advisory Committee had a plan for a BMX park there that was being fundraised for. I'm not sure if that's still happening. However, I do think it's a great spot for this museum. It won't take up a lot of space. There is a washroom there. Maybe it's too far away, but there's lots of opportunity to look at the plans and make this a very great project. So congratulations on the community enthusiasm and the spirit that's there.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Well, I would personally like to thank you, because I sort of dropped this on you This was a project that I started with Mary Walsh and actually Linda Guest, and we were trying to get this done. And then the election happened, and I felt I needed to step away from it. And back then, I thought Ken was one of my people that were trying to steal the station from me, so I stepped back and let him do his magic. So I congratulate and thank you for taking it for me, because I had to drop it to you. But I see you haven't dropped it to anyone, so that's wonderful. And I think you just heard the support around the table, so carry on and good luck. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
The second thing on the agenda is Fred and Marilyn from the library.
Greetings, Your Worship, Council. It's great to be back in front of you to take us down the next step in our aspiration to have a new library facility in the town of Paris. I want to say that we've got a real good contingent of the library board with us tonight, and with me at the podium is Marilyn Sewell, who is the chair of the Library Site Selection Committee. We're here to share with you our decision that the board made, the library board made earlier this month. And I just, as a point of order, we are very cognizant of your big agenda tonight, Your Worship, but we would hope that we will be able to entertain questions when we're done. We're going to be concise and quick with our preamble, and we'll go from there. Is that all right?
Thank you. Yeah.
Yes. One of the things that I want to do right off the bat is acknowledge the fact that when the library board did its public consultation, moving towards this target earlier this month, we did conflict with council obligations here in this room. And we were cognizant of that. We regretted that, but we were caught as the library board with our timeline, with our own availability, with the availability of our consultant to be present at the event. And I just want to acknowledge that we were aware of that, but we didn't see where we had a choice. I can tell you that all the data that we collected from the public that night has been collated by our CEO. And at our next meeting, when our minutes are approved, a report of that input from the public will be posted on the library website. So if you want to see it, it'll be there. I don't know if we can post it other ways to make it available to you, but that will happen. We're moving quickly with this, and that's been pointed out to us. What we're doing tonight is we're asking council to support our decision and approve a site for a new library in the town of Paris. We're feeling some pressure, like you may feel, to get this done. We have an opportunity to get into the next budget cycle with the county and with our own budget to move forward with this project. And we're also aware of the fact that there are grant opportunities through the federal and provincial government that we hope to take advantage of. The deadline for those is November the 12th, I believe. And this decision, if we can decide on the site, helps us to have the business plan that allows us to make those applications to get some big support for this project, hopefully. So that's a bit of a preamble. So going forward, since we were here in June, the library board did reconnect with our consultant, Chamberlain Architect Services, to revisit our site selection, this time with a particular emphasis on the current library at 12 William Street, to consider the possibility of a lease agreement with a developer, and 28 Mechanic Street, the OPP building. Those sites, those three were the priority, because since the library board has begun this dialogue in the town of Paris, all we've heard from the community is a real strong desire to have it in the downtown. So again, our 3 potential sites was winnowed down to these 3. We have a need to have a branch in the downtown core, we feel, of about 20 to 25,000 square feet. We came to council in 2016 after our first initial report from Chamberlain, where they did a feasibility study on the current building, and at that time it was determined, and the report confirmed, that the building at 12, on William Street was not able to fulfill its mission as a public library for a town the size of Paris. So we've been going since 2016, and if you look here, you can see that the growth pressures and the increased use and traffic in the libraries continues even since 2016. We know that we need a 20 to 25,000 square foot building, and we need this building to be not only the service point for the town of Paris, but also to be our administrative headquarters for our 5-branch library system. So here we are, and again, I want to reiterate that we've considered many sites over the years. We're kind of boiling it down, and what we're going to do is ask you to consider the site at the OPP station in the downtown. We see lots of benefits for this, which we've outlined here on this slide. I point out to you that, libraries on the for business side, libraries deliver $5 to $7 of economic return on investment. What that means is that for every dollar that you put into your library budget, which in the county of Brant is about $2 million, the economic return for the community and the citizens is $5 to $7 for each one of those dollars that you put into the service. As an example, if Fred wants to watch a certain series that might be on Hulu or Amazon, and I don't want to pay the $10 a month to have that show, but it's available to me through the library. It's saved me some money. I can't afford my own reading habit. If I had to go to Chapters every month, I couldn't afford the books I want to read. I am a avid reader, and I spend a lot of money at the bookstore, but each time I read a book from the library, I'm saving myself $20 to $25. So that kind of benefit extrapolated across the whole community, that $2 million that you invest in your library service is amplified across the community to the benefit of the citizens. That's what that means. We see a library in the downtown being a very big piece for our social infrastructure, for how the residents of this town site we call Paris identify with this place, and it will be an important public service in a vibrant downtown, bringing residents and guests to our doors and make it attractive. Now, I'm going to stop talking because I'm afraid I've talked too much already. Marilyn's here, and she's going to take us through some slides where our consultant sort of reported to us on the possibilities that were in front of us. Marilyn?
Let you just take this back so I don't get it messed up. Thank you very much. The first option that we looked at was looking again at the current site of the library to have another look to see, is there any way we can make it a viable library service at that site? So we asked our consultant, what would it take for us to stay there? And they presented some options with regards to going up and out, or going completely out to the side. And so while we did that, we said, please keep in mind, though, that our priorities are accessibility, meeting space requirements. We'd like to maintain the heritage structure or the heritage flavor of that building if we stay there, but we also have a lot of things that we need to keep considering for a library site. So the first two concepts, we determined that they were too small. We have decided that 20 to 25,000 square feet is what we need. We were only going to be able to get about 15,000. We didn't see that there was going to be an increase in functionality or accessibility for our patrons. And this might require the purchasing of part or all of the lot next door to the library, to the, which direction is that? West of the library. So we didn't see that that was going to gain us a lot in the future. Yep. The next option was would give us the square footage we were looking at, but it was going to require that basically the shell, the couple of walls of the building would remain and everything else would be totally gutted in order to make this happen. So it still left us with a little bit more parking on site than we had with the other options. We thought it was going to be difficult to maintain the heritage character, and certainly by doing that option, it was going to be the most expensive option that we considered, not only in building costs and construction, but also the fact that we would have to temporarily locate our library services somewhere else, and that would require a cost and budget to do that. While we love the heritage character of the original building, and while the town of Paris certainly has made their views known about how much they love that structure, we don't think that it's going to give us the feasibility or the viability and the functionality that other sites will. And I think the board is satisfied that they have exhausted all options of staying on that site. The second part we looked at was developing a partnership in a leased situation. And I'd like to just mention that that has not been done in the library services in Ontario and certainly in Canada. So that would be some uncharted territories for a library service. We could get a custom design with a local developer. We would have to have a lease at market rates, which raised some questions for us. And when we did talk about this at our consultation meeting, there was strong community opposition to investigating that kind of an option. We feel that some of the concerns that come with this is how do we match the needs of the landlord with the needs of a library? And what does a long-term lease look like? Perhaps someone would think 20 years is a long-term lease, but in the life of a library, 20 years of certainty isn't really a lot in what we are looking for. So we felt that that wasn't going to serve us as well as some other options that we had in front of us. The third option was using the space at 28 Mechanic Street, which is the OPP station. We felt this option gave us a lot of flexibility. It would amount a lot of range of design, give us the required space we could have. We could, this particular slide shows using the current footprint, expanding into part of the lot area or expanding into all of it. We think that it gives us some parking availability. We have ideas for what we could do with that structure with regard to the design, the flexibility, and I think what came to us too was it's really good if design can follow the need as opposed to forcing the needs into a constrained space. We also felt that being in the downtown, this gives us an anchor, another anchor for the downtown between the two rivers, and I think there's a lot of opportunities and potential for that site. We did some dreaming a little bit of what we could include in the library besides our core library functions. And we really have not said no to any thoughts around whether it's groups, meeting space for small groups, it's partnership with organizations, incubator space for new businesses, a chance to do things as green as we possibly can, to have indoor-outdoor patios, perhaps a rooftop. We don't think that there's any limit to the kinds of things we could offer in that space. And for those reasons, we came up to the decision that this spot on 28 Mechanic Street would best suit our needs going forward for the library's vision.
Thank you, Marilyn. So here on this slide, you see that at September 10th at our County of Brant Public Library Board meeting, the board voted unanimously to send me here tonight to share that we have determined that 28 Mechanic Street is our preferred site. What you see in front of you is a rough outline of what a budget for this might look like or is, our hope it could look like. Also keeping in mind that the opportunity is there to perhaps get some grants from senior levels of government. Next steps. With the approval of council to move on this site, will develop a business plan. We can develop the capital budget plan and make that funding request. We've got Infrastructure Canada grants that we'll apply for in November. And then moving forward through the year, that's when we'll talk about those design features, which ones make sense in a new library, consult with the community, again, talk to them about what they need in a library design, and with all of that accomplished, the possibility to begin construction in the 21-22 year. Just want to thank you, and questions.
Questions for the delegation? Councillor Ferrier first.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Fred and possibly Marilyn. So we're looking at a $7 million potential based on a rough estimate, but we're not quite sure where that could go. And in my experience, builds like this can cost a lot more. On 33, page 33 of our package, which is option 2, developer partnership, it says strong community opposition to private ownership. I'm wondering how many people were in the consultation that had that opinion, and what was the question framed like?
Well, there was about 45, 50 people attended the event. The Chamberlain architect firm was going through the presentation. It was just as we did here. It was on the table as an option. We had tables around the room where people were invited to make comment with Post-it notes and react and reflect on each of the projects, as you saw on the slides. And that one was papered with concern about the relationship between the library service and a developer.
So if it was just as it was here, there was several pages of information about option 3, which is and became the preferred option, but very little information about option 2. I'm just wondering, you'd mentioned, Marilyn, that this would be the first of its kind in Ontario if we went this route, that libraries don't do this. However, I mean, some libraries partner with the municipalities to have shared office space, which goes through a developer type situation. I know other municipal or public good buildings. I was a member of the Grand River Community Health Center staff when they went through this process, and they went through a developer partnership with a long-term, I think 35-year lease agreement. And the reason they did was because it insulates against rising costs. It makes builds happen faster, and they're able to work with the developer around a variety of issues that can occur when you're renting. You don't have to worry about certain upkeep and maintenance features. Were any of these particulars of that type of developer relationship were they brought forward at the meeting? I wasn't able to attend.
To be honest, no. We didn't get into that depth or detail. And I will tell you that there are many libraries in Ontario that are a shared and lease agreement, but no main branches, no headquarter library in Canada is in that situation. So, that, I guess that would be, to be clear, that's the difference.
And then I guess my last piece would be, at least 2 times that I've seen, council's made, requests or at least asked if it would be possible to have a senior level staff person from the municipality in on these meetings, because then for us anyway, I know as councillors, we'd be able to ask some of these questions outside of the public forum and with staff who might have knowledge about a number of other things that are happening in the community to avoid some of these potential delays. If we're looking at 7 million plus, is that something that the library board would be open to working with us on?
I think the library board would prefer that the county staff work with our CEO, who's available and ready at any time to answer the questions. As the library board itself and our subcommittee is what it is, and we're in our role to help ensure that the citizens of the County of Brant have the best library service that's possible, all things considered. So we do that, and we have one employee who is Kelly, and she's available, and is our spokesperson, and we would prefer that the county work through her.
Okay, no, I do like the options I'm seeing here, and
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Nobody around this table probably uses the library more than I do with my family, and my library record will check out. But we have to have a lot of due diligence on such a large purchase, and we have to do it right. So
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that those protections are in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gatward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to the chair. You mentioned, Fred, that the grant from Infrastructure Ontario was coming up in November of this year, but that you didn't want to start till 2020, 21, 22? Did I get that right?
Well, actual construction, yes, but, you know, we would hope that we would have the opportunity to apply for those grants to accomplish that construction this fall, yeah.
Right, and the grants often come with a stipulation of a completion date. You have to have your project done by March or whatever. And that's a concern when you said you were going to start in 21, 22. Do you know if the grants that are being offered in the near future have a must be done by date?
If you don't mind, Your Worship, and Councillor Gatward, I'm just going to defer to our CEO, Kelly, because, of course, it will be Kelly who puts these applications together.
That's a great question. There is a deadline that the grant construction has to be spent by, and I believe it's 2027 or 2029. It's well out of what our anticipated build timeline is.
Thank you. So there's lots of time. That's good news. That's all I have for now. Oh, one other thing. The high-level numbers that you gave us, do you have an actual breakdown, more of the costs for that library as far as construction, interior finishing, that kind of thing?
Yes, Kelly has sort of factored that into that price that you see on the slide. And I just want to ask through you, Your Worship, was Councillor Gatward was referring to any particular of the sites when you asked about the build and the materials and the costs? Was there one? Or, you're talking about Mechanic Street? Or one of the others?
I was talking about the new $7
Yes.
million build.
Yes, okay.
And that brings up the other question. Marilyn mentioned that we may be able to use some of the building. I thought I heard we were going to tear it down. Which is it?
Well, there's a number of possibilities on that site. We can, on the Mechanic Street site, we can cover the whole property with a single-story structure. We could make a smaller footprint, which opens up more parking, and have a second story or a third story. All those design decisions haven't been finalized or made yet, but there are options on that site for how we would configure the building based on the design sort of features that the community is looking for when we do that consultation. But there are options, right?
And the
on that
options
site.
are still being considered then.
Yeah, 'cause we're not designing a library yet. We're just wanting to get started with a site that we know we're building on.
Well, my advice, if you're going to keep what's there, is don't use the basement.
Yes.
Thank you, Councillor Gatward. Councillor House.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. I like the idea of the library remaining between the two rivers downtown. I liked seeing the words community hub in your presentation. You said that, you know, you're open to all possibilities. Specifically, I want to touch on earlier this year, this council passed a motion for the Paris Museum to be included in what was going to be the library and recreational community hub building on the other side of the river. Is that something that when you say community hub possibilities, does that fall into that possible range of community use?
Yeah, through you, Your Worship, I'd like to assure the council that the library's open to those kinds of possibilities and partnerships in keeping in mind that we need the space we need for the library. And, but to just say that out of hand that there's not room for other things would be wrong. There's many things that could be part of the design, which we spoke about before in terms of business incubator space and gallery display areas for the arts community. And so with the museum, it just comes down to space, having some sense of what their needs are, and a partner that we could work with would be required. But when we look at Mechanic Street, our first priority as a library board is to ensure that our staff and the community have that 20 to 25,000 square feet for the library service, and then we go from there.
Councillor Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, a couple things. So first of all, I agree with the fact of as much as it's a fantastic building that you're in right now, I think the amount of work and the amount of money that would have to be put into that to get the end result we're looking for, I would agree that's probably not worth it. So let's take that off the table for now. I thought Councillor Howes was going to go where I'm going here, but he kind of touched on it. It wasn't that long ago that the library did its site selection committee and chose the Sillaps area as the preferred site. Then when we as council discussed the potential of a parking facility up here, it was never suggested a preferred, but it was discussed the possibility of the library potentially taking the main floor of that. And then now with what's come up with the 28 Mechanic being available, that is now, you've gone back to the board and that is now your preferred site. I'm not saying that I'm against this, but what I want to ensure here is the fact that we're not a year down the road and we find another preferred site. Again, I don't mean that in a bad way, but as I say, everybody was happier than a you know what with the site at the Sillaps there. So again, I'm concerned the fact that I don't want to get down the road and we have another preferred site. And just quickly in regards to the site over here, you're talking a single story, a double story and stuff like that. And I know Kelly would know because she's from Waterloo, the library there has actually parking underneath, which would assist with the flooding aspects and all that here. So again, I just want your comments on the preferred site here again.
Okay. Maryland is stepping up for this one, if that's okay, Your Worship.
Thank you.
Thank you, and that's, we anticipated, how many times are you going to hear, this is really the best site? No. I think when we started out this process, the thing we promised to the community is that we were going to be nimble. That's a word we picked up and used, nimble and responsive. And if we found something that was going to suit our needs better in our discovery phase, we were going to take a look at that. And certainly when I was back here, we were here in October, we were very pleased with what we thought was going to be the best spot for the new library. Since that time, more information has come to us, more places became available that we didn't know of before. What is considered downtown is a concept that we didn't have when we had that consultation. And our view of what we thought Sillaps would turn into, some of the statements were about capturing the rivers, taking a look at that natural space, seeing how we could make a beautiful and functional place there. I'm not sure that that's the same vision going forward that everybody has. So we looked at a lot of those things and said, if we have another chance to have a look at something, let's be responsible and take a look at that. And that's why we did, and we came back and said, given what we know, this is where we would like to land.
Okay, I appreciate the answer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pierce. Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to the delegation. I guess when you're building new, you can have free reign over creativity and how it looks, and so I encourage you to do that as long as it fits with the downtown Paris. And I'll give you an example. Part of the public library in Vancouver looks like the Coliseum, and I always thought that was cool.
Yes.
I need you to interpret this statement for me, and I'm going to touch on what Councillor Pearce and Councillor House have already touched on. Talking about the SILAP site. Through work on concept designs for the SILAP site, it became clear that any aspect over the river or advantage of the natural area would be problematic to realize. And there was no, what's problematic about it? Because I thought it was a good site as well.
What we have been told is that architecturally, that with the berm, with the trees, with the positioning, that there really isn't a way to kind of get that overlook over the river and make it have that feel of being on connected to the river and to the other side. I found that a bit surprising, but we've been assured that it's more problematic than we might have appreciated. That's all I can tell you about that. I'm not being an engineer or designer, but apparently it was more problematic than we might have anticipated, even though the proximity's there, really the interconnectedness was not really a possibility.
Okay, I'll leave it at that. Thank you for the answer. The second question I have, last question I have. This site, you mentioned 28 Mechanic Street, you can put a 20,000 footprint building on it, and that's just for the services that the library will provide, is that correct?
And it would include space for our staff. We would need some space to do technical things, a loading dock,
But basically,
and our administration.
It's
Yes.
all library
Yes.
stuff, okay. And I know we were, as a council, we were kind of hoping that maybe it wouldn't be a standalone library, maybe it'd be part of and you say it in your presentation, community hub, but, you know, we did mention the museum and stuff. And is there room, do you know, on that site to maybe look at some of those things?
The report we got from our architect, Chamberlain, did not give us that. Their report to us and those drawings that we've got back here, like this one, are based on the premise of the 20 to 25,000 square feet for library service. But we, that kind of design wasn't what they were asked for. And we're not designing a building today, but if you make the building, if you want to include another service, a partner, the building could be designed a different way. But as I said earlier, the library service needs that 20 to 25,000 square feet.
Okay, so I think you're saying kind of you would prefer not to.
Well, no, it just, what I'm trying to say, Councillor Miller, is that the drawings and the concepts that I've brought to you tonight only were designed for library service.
Okay.
And that's what these are, just concept drawings. We haven't done design work yet.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Fred and to Marilyn. Let me say straight away, I think putting the library downtown makes great sense, and I'm really supportive of it. However, I'm a kind of practical guy, so a couple of observations. You said 20 or 25,000 square feet, and then you present the numbers based on 20. So if it happened to be 25, I think we had another 2.5 million if I just prorate things. So if I was trying to sell this, I would do the same. So I'm okay with that. But I do have a couple of issues. Such a strong negative around not being the owners. I think there's a real opportunity here to get what you want in the place you want at a lower cost to the community if we are open to leasing on a long-term basis, which then brings me to an opportunity that we may have internally with BME, Brant Municipal Enterprises. This is a perfect opportunity, I think, to use the services of Brant Municipal Enterprises to take the cost off the county books, put them on BME books, still provide the facility that we want. But a question, actually not to yourselves, but to staff, do we have any alternative uses for that site that would preclude it becoming the site for the library?
Mr. Radley?
Your worship, if I could, it's probably more appropriate to deal with that question after the delegation is finished. Usually staff would answer questions when you're considering the delegation, so.
Thank you. Anything else, Councillor Bell? Any other questions to the presenter? Councillor Wheat.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's not really a question. It's more of a comment. I'd like to respond to a couple councillors who have asked questions. Been on the library board for 16 years, and we've built 2 new ones in this county. They've been successful, Burford and Scotland. The site at Solapse was going to be included in a master plan of a whole conglomeration of different things, and that's going to be a long ways off. Indoor gymnasium, museum. There's different things that are going to happen at that site. So that's going to put the library a few 5 to 6 or 7 years down the road. A few months back, there was a public meeting here concerning the downtown Paris master plan. And that's when this really bubbled its way to the top. Because there was a lot, unfortunately, I wasn't there that night, but there was a lot of people there talking about the downtown master plan. And even to begin with, when we were looking at Solapse, there was people that wanted that library downtown. That was closer at Solapse than the twin pad, the Brant Sports Complex. But when you looked at the downtown master plan public meeting, which was 3 or 4 months ago, the feedback I got from that was, can that library not fit into that master plan somewhere? And that's what really bubbled this to the surface. That's just a comment, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Wheat. Anything else to the presenter? Councillor House?
Mr. Chair, if there are no other questions, I've patched together a motion specific to this delegation. Do you want to hear it now or later?
No, let's do it a little later. Let's let the presenter sit down. Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm sorry that the timing of your last meeting was so unfortunate for us, because it's such a big ticket item, and to have no council there and to have no staff there, it's really unfortunate, because it's coming to us as a brand new idea. And that's just, as you said, a timing thing, but it's really unfortunate that we didn't hear all that discussion and see those breakout pieces. But anyway, it is what it is, and it's here now. So thank you for the presentation, and we'll decide in a few minutes what we're going to do with it. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Number C on the agenda is Jay Hitchon and Howard Snodgrass.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We're appearing before you this evening in respect of a recommendation coming to you from PAC with respect to the McBay Road property that Mr. Snodgrass appeared before PAC on before. And it was at PAC, in a relatively narrow decision, it was recommended that the application for an official plan amendment and zoning bylaw be refused. We're here this evening to ask you to reconsider that decision. And we're asking that you would pull it out from the PAC report and vote on it separately. And obviously, we would like you to vote to approve the application. I'm here under the heading that it's never too late to do the right thing. What is the right thing? In our submission, it is to correct an acknowledged mapping error that occurred during the OP process from 2010 to ministerial approval in 2012. In our submission, fairness and equity demand that what could have been done at that time, what should have been done at that time, and what would have been done at that time had it been known, was to designate the subject lands as rural residential, which is what we are asking this council to do now.
That is what was done with all the other lands that were designated as estate residential in your previous official plan. They became rural residential. And I'm here this evening to add another voice to what the process was back then, because I was involved in it, and both in making presentations to PAC and to council, and then ultimately to the Ontario Municipal Board as it then was. And Mr. Stefanko heard most of those appeals. County staff at that time and ministry staff through Scott Oliver were always telling us that they were not going to expand in any way the estate residential with more rural residential designations, but they certainly were not going to down designate any property. And through this mapping error, which is acknowledged, it's in your material that it was a mapping error, this is exactly what happened. It was a down designation. This error in mapping was confirmed by Mr. Pomponi in his email to Mr. Snodgrass that's again in the material. And the mapping clearly shows this area. Howard, do we have that map? Is it?
Could you call up presentation, please?
Can you get the two on it? This one will suffice, but there is a side-by-side one that's also is very demonstrative of confirming this to have been an oversight at the mapping stage. But we'll go back and we can use this one for our purposes. So in our submission, the lands before were clearly contained in the estate residential zone. And then the small notch was left out in the 2010 version that was approved finally by the ministry in 2012. In our submission, this is akin to a housekeeping revision that this county has undertaken on numerous occasions when mapping type errors have occurred, and we would ask you to view it in that fashion as a technical revision. If you need more justification in your planning staff report and elsewhere, the reason that was put forward, as I understand it from reading the planning staff report, was that the growth plan did not allow for changes, or this is not an appropriate area to have for rural residential. That's at page 4 of the staff report, when it says that rural settlements are defined in the growth plan as existing hamlets or similar existing small settlement areas that are long established and identified in official plans. That's what was in the official plan when we started out in 2010, so that come from 1998 or so, or around that time. So that entire swath has been designated, and also going down Hammond Road for large estate residential development, and it has developed that way. So in our submission, this would be an area that could be recognized for rural residential uses. Talks about the Brant County official plan and says the official plan identifies the primary intent of the rural residential designation which you are seeking is only to recognize existing concentrations, and those words are underlined, existing concentrations, of large lot residential development. That's what we've got here. It's all around us. It's all up and down there, and it's been there. So I think you can even justify it if you don't say that you're just correcting an error, you can look at it now and saying what we did back then was wrong, and we can correct it through this process and not offend the growth plan nor our official plan. With the greatest of respect, it seems to me to be unfair to acknowledge that an error in mapping has occurred and yet judge the application on the basis of that error. It's circular. It shouldn't have been agricultural. Then you say, well, the error made it agricultural, so now we're going to put you up to the agricultural standards. That in our submission is circular, and that this application should be viewed on what should have taken place in the 2012 ministry-approved official plan. I want to say to consider this, if it was okay to designate all those other lands that were ER, that's how the official plan looked, with all these ER swaths there, out in South Dumfries, along Langford Church and other areas. If it was okay to keep those under the existing policy at the time and just change the designation from ER to RR, then I submit to you that it is also proper and not contrary to your planning documents to do that now. I submit to you that it is still okay, and it is not too late to do the right thing. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
We're here for questions, should
Okay.
council have any.
Is there any questions to Mr. Hitchon? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to number D on the agenda, Cam Johnson, reporting from Millards.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Again, my name is Cameron Johnson. I'm a partner with Millard Ross Roseborough. It's my pleasure tonight to present the audited financial statements of the Corporation of the County of Brant for the year ended December 31st, 2018. One of the things that I did hand out tonight was a report to members of Brant County Council. You can read that at your leisure. I'll just highlight the points very, very quickly through it to make it as efficient as possible. And some of the key things is that the report that we did issue to the financial statements is an unqualified report, and we'll see that in a couple of minutes when we highlight a few points. Our independence with the county is that we do confirm that we are independent of the County of Brant. That's a basic requirement in order to issue an assurance type of engagement, which an audit is. One of the things that we'll bring to your attention as well is the financial statements themselves. They are the responsibilities of management of the county. So management is responsible for the preparation of the financial statements. Throughout the course of the audit, we seek various representations from management, and then also at the conclusion of the audit, we seek representations from management and actually have a formal signed management letter of representation from management. Some of the reportable findings, as we've not noted, coming through the financial statements, we've not noted any significant changes in accounting policies through the year. The key behind that is if you want to manipulate a set of financial statements, you can do that by changing an accounting policy. It can have a significant impact on how a number is presented. One of the things that we do throughout the course of the audit is we take a look at the policies that are in place to make sure that if there is a change to an accounting policy, it's done. It's an appropriate policy, and it's also done on a retrospective basis. But we highlight that there weren't any changes to significant accounting policies throughout the year. Materiality is we take a look at materiality and we define what a level of materiality is throughout the course of the audit. We use this number to perform our testing throughout the audit. And then we also take a look at a level of materiality to look at differences that we encounter throughout the audit compared to staff. And we can easily come up with a difference where, we would identify an invoice that was received in April that related to 2018, where staff have actually closed off in February, because they have to move forward with getting the year end done. So if we came across something that late, we would consider that if it was significant enough to be considered an unadjusted difference. This year, throughout the course of the audit, our unadjusted differences in total are under $50,000. And I don't think any one item was over $10,000 for an unadjusted difference, which is very good. In the past, we've had significantly larger unadjusted differences, primarily related to the valuation of the Brant Business Park, but that's now all been sold pretty well, so we're in great shape as far as that was concerned. Misstatements. Again, we look at significant audit adjustments throughout the course of the audit. Is if we put smaller items to the summary of unadjusted differences, if we do come across a significant item in the audit, we will make a recommendation to staff to make an adjustment, and we did not have any of those recommendations in the current year. Internal controls, we've updated our internal control documentation and our understanding of the controls during the year, and also during the year we did not discover any significant deficiencies in the internal control process. I'd like to report is that we did not have any difficulties throughout the course of the audit, and also through Heather and her staff, we received excellent cooperation throughout the audit. We did not encounter any difficulties at all in the audit. All the information that we requested, we did receive to the best of our knowledge, and we didn't feel like we had any scope limitations throughout the course of the audit. If I may, on the set of financial statements that you did receive, I am not going to read it this year because the auditor's report is now too long to read. I made the mistake, the first presentation I did in the 2019, I read the auditor's report, and I think half the group were asleep by the time I was finished. But this does highlight a bit more expanded version than what we had before. If you recall, in the past, the reports have been about one full page. We're a page and a half here now. We're now actually seeing a lot of auditors' reports moving closer to 2 pages to 2.5 pages long, depending on what's in there. But the key point behind it is the opinion, which I'll highlight in a second, basis of opinion. It also brings to attention of the users of the financial statements related to the responsibilities of management and those charged with governance, and also the auditor's responsibilities on the audited financial statements. But the key part behind this is the opinion, and we've audited the consolidated financial statements of the Corporation of the County of Brant, the entity, which comprised the consolidated statement of financial position as at December 31, 2018, and the consolidated statements of operations and accumulated surplus, changes in net financial assets and cash flows for the year then ended, and notes the consolidated financial statements, including a summary of significant accounting policies. And it's in our opinion, the accompanying consolidated financial statements present fairly in all material respects the consolidated financial position of the entity as at December 31, 2018, and the results of its operations, its changes in net financial assets, and its cash flows for the year then ended in accordance with Canadian public sector accounting standards. If I may, I'll just highlight a couple quick points on the statements. Page 4 of the statements is the statement of financial assets. And you can see this year our cash balance, cash and cash equivalents, $17 million, up from last year, and our investments now at $35 million. Be pleased to highlight these numbers in the sense that over the last few years, these numbers have been going up, which is the correct direction to go. One of the councillors asked me a few years ago about what kind of position the county was in. And at the time, we had significant reserves and reserve funds that were in place, but there wasn't a dime to spend on those reserves and reserve funds. We're now well on the way to bringing that back over the years because of the expansion related to this southwest, up above, the southwest area. One of the things that we did have a few years ago on the financial statements, if you recall too, for some of the existing councillors, is we did a significant write-down on the development charges that were related to the southwest area. And I think it was to the tune of about $18 to $20 million. Well, that number has now come down. We actually dropped, I think, another $4 million on that amount this current year. So the funds that were being received now for development charges are paying down that amount that was written off originally on the financial statements, and it's coming into income as we're earning it now. So it's an excellent direction to be moving. As well, too, is for the current year, for 2018, no new debt, but we've also managed to pay down $3 million of the existing debt that is in place. The development revenue on the statements is excellent. It's gone way up over the year before, and a lot of that tends to be timing, depending on the development projects. And mention the cash quickly is that we still don't have enough funds in place to cover all the reserves and the reserve funds, but we've made a significant direction. I think the reserves, we've got about $53 million worth of cash and investments right now, and I think our reserve funds are totaling of about $51 million, plus then also the reserves that are in place, and then we also have deferred revenue, and our deferred revenue on our financial statements is about $5.9 million, which is essentially occupying cash as well. But it is still going in the right direction. So you can see our total financial assets, $85 million. Our total financial liabilities of $80.9 million. So our net financial assets on the statements are $4.9 million. That's been more or less a steady improvement. Can be a difference because of timing each year over the year. The nice number two as well is $274 million of our net book value of our tangible capital assets. I think in the current year, the county spent about $28 million on tangible capital assets. So infrastructure, buildings, etc., over the year, and equipment. So overall, very, very good. Page 5, very briefly, is our statement of operations and accumulated surplus. This is the income statement on a full accrual basis for the county. And on a full accrual basis, you can see we have total revenues of $102 million, total expenditures of $73 million before our tangible capital assets and our amortization. And overall, on a full accrual basis, our annual surplus from operations was $16.6 million. Last year, we were 21.45. Last year, we also had the disposition of the property related to the transfer of the boundary adjustment to the city of Brantford, which came into that number. But overall, very good. And again, this is a full accrual basis, so we're recognizing different liabilities that you would normally see than the fund. We have the landfill liabilities. We've got future employment benefits that are recognized in this, for example, but we also have other incomes as well. We have funds that have come in from development charges are in this number. No transfers from reserves, they've been removed from this number, but we've ended up with and capital assets are not included as an expenditure. So anytime we have a capital fund expenditure that happens to be a capital asset, it's booked as a balance sheet item on the statement of financial position. And then also capital assets that are purchased through operations are not included in the statement of operations. So we can see we've got $16.6 million compared to your fund surplus this year, which was also very good, at a fund surplus reported by the treasurer of $435,000, about $200. So again, I guess through the mayor, may I ask if there's any questions related for the statements? I won't go through them in any more detail.
I could listen to you talk all night, Cam. Are there any questions to Mr. Johnson? Councillor Miller.
Through you, Your Worship, to Cam, kudos to you for preempting my question, because I was going to ask you what was trending well, what wasn't trending well, and you answered that ahead of time, so I appreciate that. A question about the OMERS contributions, and maybe I'm diving into the weeds too much, and if I am, just tell me, and maybe it's better for our treasurer. But we, from 2017 to 2018, the amount we contributed went up by 8.6%. Do you know why?
That is OMERS. That's a requirement of OMERS funding.
Yeah, no, I know we have to, but do we have more people retired, or I'm not sure if they upped their contribution amount to make up for their deficit.
I think Heather might be able to, if there's a percent increase, but I don't think there's any question that we're going to see OMERS going up in the future because of their significant deficit. And I think we have a note to the financial statements as well, with the anticipation that if that deficit continues, that our premiums are going to go up significantly.
Yeah, like I say, 8.6%, I thought that was a big jump, and I suspect, yeah, like you said, it'll keep well ahead of the pace of inflation. Okay, I'll follow up with Heather, so thank you, Cam.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Any other questions for Cam? Councillor Chambers.
Thank you. Through you to Cam. I think last year I asked you a question about actually, you had stated, I asked you to repeat it, that we were in a strong financial position last year. Would you say that we are in a stronger financial position this year?
Yes, you're moving in the proper direction. If you recall, a few years back was the comment about with the costs related to the development up in the south area, it was a significant cost and whether we were ever going to recover it. And even at the time, that was when the development charge consultant made the comment, is there's no way you will ever get that money back. And that's what triggered the decision to write off all that, the development expenditure at the time. You are paid a significant amount of that back beyond what was originally anticipated. So yes, you're absolutely moving in the right direction.
Thank you. Any other questions for Cam? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on in the agenda, we're going to talk about how we're going to deal with the delegations. The first one, the proposal for the development of the Railway Museum in Mount Pleasant. How do you want to deal with that? Councillor Coleman?
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to put it forward in splitting up some of their asks in two parts. I would like to move that we look at accepting donations and setting up through our staff a registered charity status, and that we waive the tipping fees at the biggest landfill for the refuse that's coming from there. And the other parts about the general site preparation, installation of services and washroom facilities, we let the staff to come up with some recommendations and bring it back to committee in a later report. So that's the way I would seeking a seconder on that, Mr. Mayor.
Seconder, Councillor Bell? Okay. Before we go any further, it's been brought to my attention that we can't accept funds to the county and we can't issue receipts the way it stands now. So we would have to do something.
Exactly.
Something to make it so that we can
to make it work.
That's right.
Thank you.
Councillor Gatward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And the work that needs to be done on this project, I would hope that our Heritage Committee, our Brant County Heritage Committee, would be able to work with this museum group. So I would ask that happen. I think they could use some guidance and expertise probably from each other. The site for the park would have to go to
Mr. Mayor, point of
community.
order. I'm not sure this is speaking to the motion that's on the table.
Thank you, Councillor Pierce.
Well, this is in addition. This is in addition. We can't do what Councillor Coleman said about the washrooms and the servicing until Community Services formally approves the site. So I think.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor, that is what I said. That part is the second part of the motion.
Yeah, Councillor Gatward, I think what we'll do is we'll sort of reinvestigate the washroom piece of it, because I think that park probably needs to be looked at again to facilitate the rest of the things that are going on in that park too. So let's try to just talk about the railway station if we could. And
So we're not going to approve the site?
No, we can't right now. We can't right now. I think the delegation was just looking for support at the table so that they can proceed, because they have no costing done or anything yet. And if they haven't got support from the county, or they don't think the county's going to step up for them, I think they're sort of out to lunch as far as what they do next.
Thank you. And Mr. Mayor, are you aware if anybody's referred them to the county grant program?
I'm not sure of that, but we can certainly make sure they get directed.
But it's on right now, the application.
Okay,
Thank you.
yeah. Can we get the motion then from Councillor Coleman? Are you still seconding the motion, Councillor Gatward? Or, I'm sorry, Councillor Bell? Any other discussion? Is the motion clear? Can you read back the motion?
Sorry, I was just gonna ask for clarification on that, because I know like currently we can't do the receipt for donation, so just how we're gonna deal with that wording.
Councillor,
Turn that over to Treasury to come up with a way that we can work with accepting.
so let's just make the motion then to defer it to staff.
Yeah, but the tipping fees, we can do that here.
We can talk about the tipping fees later.
Okay.
That's clear. It's just defer it back to staff and they can dissect it. and show support where we can show support. The tipping fees are now, yeah. Everyone's clear? Call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. The next one is going to be the library. How do you want to handle that? Councillor House.
I move that we receive this request as information and refer to staff for a report to include analysis of all potential uses of 28 Mechanic Street, financial analysis of this proposal, and how it could fit into the context of the proposed downtown master plan.
Seeking a seconder. Councillor Ferrier. Discussion. Councillor Chambers.
Could you repeat that, please? There's quite a lot to that.
I move that we receive this request as information and refer to staff for a report to include analysis of all potential uses of 28 Mechanic Street, financial analysis of this proposal, and how it could fit into the context of the proposed downtown master plan.
Councillor Chambers.
So basically, that's not endorsing their site selection at this point.
Councillor House.
With so many moving pieces right now, we have a lot of different elements happening within the county, and some of them are $10 million and some of them are $100 million. I think we need to kind of review how all the moving pieces can fit together, and specifically with this, how it can relate with the proposed downtown master plan before we can make any decisions.
Are you okay, Councillor Chambers?
Oh, no, I'm not, to tell you the truth, but I'll speak to that later.
Anything else? We have a seconder? Yep. Any other conversation? Councillor Chambers.
Okay, and I understand where you're going with the resolution. You want to make sure we do it right, I suppose, and I'm not suggesting that what you're suggesting is doing it wrong. The fact of the matter is the library in its current position, location, is inadequate, and they are moving toward a new library, and it needs to be somewhere. And to be quite frank, I don't care where it is as long as it's there. I think the due diligence that the library board has done in looking at various sites has been impressive. I believe it coincides with the master plan, at least that was suggested, I think, by someone around the table. And I think what you're suggesting is valid and can be done concurrently with an approval of the site selection, recognizing, of course, that if some mitigating factors come forward, that site may be not appropriate, just like the last one was changed, that the chips will fall where they fall. But I think we need to endorse the location, and if something happens in the meantime, then it's going to happen. But I think it's important if we want to move forward with the library in a reasonably expeditious manner, then we need to move forward and allow them to build on or build plans on begin planning on a site. So maybe I'm concurring with what you're saying, but at the same time, I'm hearing that you're not endorsing the site, which leaves the library in limbo at this point, and that's not a good place to be.
Thank you. Councillor Ferrier.
I think that's all well taken and well expressed, but I also look at it from the point of view of the potential opposition of other groups that may want to look at potentialities for that site specifically. It hasn't been open to the public. I'd also like to see I think the library has done their due diligence, but I think I would be more comfortable if we had staff do due diligence on that end too, to look at some of the numbers and some of the proposal and some of the fit. And this is again why multiple times, I know I have and others have asked, that senior members of staff be more involved in the process as a whole to make sure that Ts are crossed and Is are dotted and it doesn't conflict with other things. To your point about being concurrent, I think that's true. However, even with not approving the site this minute, plans can still be made, as plans have been made for other sites previously while this is going on. It does affect that funding window potentially, but that's something we're going to have to work on. Hopefully we can get it, we can rush this so that we can still meet some of those deadlines, in my opinion.
Thank you. Councillor Bell.
Yeah, I think I'm going to think through you, Mr. Mayor. I think I'm saying the same as Mark, that I can't jump yet to a conclusion that the 28 Mechanic Street is the location. What I can say is I'm absolutely confident it should be downtown, but we have other county-owned property downtown. For example, just behind us in the car park, we had a vision in the downtown master plan of something that could be very attractive, and there's no reason to think that the lower floor of that couldn't be the new library. I think it would functionally serve the same purpose as 28 Mechanic Street, which might have a higher and better purpose, which I've not yet heard of. So I think it does require due diligence on the part of the county staff to bring back a report on whether that makes sense for the county as well as for the library.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. Councillor Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, just kind of in line with what's been said here, I would agree with the fact, and that is why I posed the question/statement to the delegation when they were up there. You know, prior to this last one, everything was going ahead with the Salapse location, knowing full well that that wasn't going to happen tomorrow. I guess the big question here, the most important question here would be, with the recommendation from Councillor Howes, what would staff suggest that it might take them to do a review on this? Are we talking 1 cycle, 2 cycles? Because if that's the case, that's really only a couple of months to ensure that this is in fact the preferred site from the county, not just the preferred site from the library.
Thank you, Councillor Pierce. Are there any more questions? Councillor Gatward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I understand the reasoning that's going around this table. A couple months isn't that long, but the chairman stated that the grant process is in November. I'm not sure when that process closes, but if we miss that window of opportunity and that grant funding, then shame on us.
Thank you, Councillor Gatward. Councillor Pierce had a question to staff. Michael?
Thank you. Your Worship, through you, in terms of a report, there's a couple of other requests for reports on this agenda, but I'm confident we could have a report back to the November cycle. So.
Satisfied with that? Thank you. Yeah. Any other questions? Everyone's clear of the recommendation? All those in favor? Opposed? Noted, carried, thank you. Number C, the official plan, the zoning bylaw amendment for 120 McVeigh Road. How do you want to handle that?
Move to be received, and we'll deal with, and we'll get the recommendation number 6.
It's on the floor to be received, seconded by Councillor Pierce. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried, thank you. What are we going to do with CAM's financials?
Mayor?
Yeah, Councillor Coleman?
Resolution to report.
Okay.
Moved by myself, second by Councillor Howes, that the report to the members of the Brant County Council and the consolidated financial statements for the year ending December 31st, 2018 be received as information.
Thank you. We have a seconder. Any conversation?
Councillor Howes. Councillor Howes did.
Yeah. Any conversation to that? Councillor Chambers?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a comment. Again, you heard me ask the question about the strength of the financial position of the county and it's trending in the right direction. I asked that question because a few years ago it wasn't. And if everyone looks at their desk, you'll see that we established some key strategic priorities a few years ago to address that very point where we were not in a strengthening financial position, but now we are. So the fact is that if you do plan, if you do prioritize, if you do state objectives, if you do strategic planning and follow through, it produces results. And that, I think, is a success of previous councils and this council moving in the right direction. in
Thank you.
terms of the financial stability and sustainability of Brant County.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I thought I heard Cam say that he saved us enough money to buy a library. I thought the numbers lined up pretty good, but anyway, having it on the floor and seconded, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Adoption of the minutes from the previous meetings. Thank you.
It's moved by myself, second by Councillor McAlpine, in the minutes of July 23rd, July 25th, July 25th, second meeting, September 9th, and September 12th be approved.
Any questions to the reports? All those in favor? Receive. Thank you. Number 7, consult item. It's a consent item, sorry. Councillor House?
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor McAlpine, that 7A consent item to be approved, that the draft community grants application be approved.
Does anyone want any of those separated? No? Seeing none? All those in favor? Oh, I'm sorry. Consent items. Yeah. Items to be received?
Oh, that's me again,
That's you.
sorry. Walk faster.
Does anyone want any of those separated, or are we going to vote? Councillor Miller?
Not separate, but I do have a question on 7B3 once the motion's made.
Okay.
So moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Pierce. Consent items to be received as information, numbers 1 through 18.
Yeah. Councillor Miller, you want to speak to number 3?
Yeah, please, thank you. I can't find it here, but that letter from Minister Mulroney to MPP Belinda Carahalios says that the County of Brant will be financially responsible for any proposed Highway 403 interchange at Bishop's Gate Road. And you guys, we had a delegation there at Roma, I believe, and was that the impression that you guys were left with when you left Toronto that week?
No. It wasn't.
I'm just, okay, so, yeah. And it's interesting because she says the interchange is to accommodate local growth and development. Keep in mind, from our perspective, that growth is directed by the province. So I'm just wondering what the next steps would be if that's how the provincial government sees it, that we are completely responsible financially for that interchange.
Yeah, I think Minister Mulroney was pretty clear that it was up to us to come up with all of that money. She didn't think that there was any commitment from the province to help us out at all.
I guess we'll have this conversation,
We'll
have more to this conversation later on, I
That's
guess.
right.
Yeah. So-
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I thought it was an interesting letter coming back to Cambridge MP. I wondered why it wasn't written to our own MPP rather, or even directly to yourself. But I took really a positive note out of this, that if we can find the money, we go. So I would like to see that is taken up in our future, in our next budget cycle, that we look to really define when we're going to do this project. There seems to be no hindrance now from provincial government to this project.
I think she was very keen for us to find the money too. I just didn't think she wanted us to look at her. So I think we are very keen. We need to do it. I mean, we need to direct the traffic and get it to the highways quickly as we can, but I don't think Ms. Mulroney was interested.
And I think just following on from the Millard's presentation, I mean, just taking Robert's point that we're in a stronger financial position now, so let's use our financial strength to improve the overall infrastructure and this very important piece of it.
Thank you. Councillor Ferrier.
Well, I agree. I do hope that we maybe have some communication with our MPP, who is uniquely situated to understand this issue because he was on this council. And I think that'd be helpful because that growth, as he knows, was directed by the previous provincial government. And yet we're on the hook for a pretty major infrastructure improvement that is also improving the highway and traffic flow for other communities as well. And I just think that's something that we need to explore because we have a lot of question marks about next year's budget and provincial funding as well, so.
Any other questions, Councillor Atwood?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to make council aware of 7B7. The Police Services Board have been reviewing the false alarm reports and come up with a plan that will be coming to CDC probably next meeting, and it is to help stop all the false alarms that we get and save the county money. So I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention.
Thank you. Is there any other comments or concerns before we vote? Seeing none, all those in favor? And opposed? Carried. Thank you. Committee reports. Planning Advisory Committee.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Howes, that the Planning Advisory Report of September the 3rd, 2019 be approved, noting that there were 7 items.
Councillor Pierce.
I think we should pull number 6.
Number 6.
Talk about that.
All right. Do you want to vote on every, Councillor Pierce, or Councillor Bell?
I would like to get clarification on item number 2,
All right.
which did not seem to summarise the long discussion we had on the Rogers Telecoms tower. I thought we'd actually voted to refuse the proposal from staff, and that's not minuted here.
Okay. Anything else that want to be separated? Councillor Gatward.
It doesn't necessarily have to be separated, but number 5, the Manzo application, we asked for the site plan to be bumped up, but it doesn't state that in the minutes, and I don't want that to be lost.
Can you make a note of that?
It is in the minutes.
It is in the minutes? Councillor Gatward, you're okay with that?
Yeah, as long as it comes back to this council for approval.
Okay. Councillor Bell, you want to talk about the tower? Do you want to?
Yeah, well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. We had quite a long and heated discussion, which resulted in a recorded vote of 11 noes and no yeses. So it was pretty resounding refusal of the proposal that we had, and I didn't see it included in the minutes. I think it ought to be included in our report there.
All right. Heather?
Recommendations only go on the report when they're carried. So the recommendation was to respond positively on the tower. That recommendation was refused. In terms of the tower applications, that just means no action is taken. The county's not going to send any response. And that's why we get into discussions about when planning recommendations are refused.
Thank you, Heather. My education has just stepped up.
Skyrocketed, yeah, I saw it. Who else had something to separate? Councillor Pierce.
Yeah, well, the number 6, we had a delegation up here earlier speaking to that. And I know at the planning meeting and several planning meetings that Mr. Snodgrass had spoke of this and the fact that how the official plan was changed, I believe, back in 2010, I believe it was. And this land was all part of that all along. And the discussion was that they felt that that extra parcel of land should in fact be as it was when they purchased it. And as I voted the planning meeting, the request was to refuse the application. I voted against the refusal because I feel that we should be changing that portion of land to be rural residential as it was in our official plan. So I'm not sure, I guess because it hasn't been voted on by council yet, do we still need the 2/3 to bring that back, or how does this work?
I think we've taken it back to planning now, haven't we? Councillor Wheat?
My interpretation, the recommendation is to refuse. If we support item 6, then it's refused and it's done. If we're going to vote on number 6 separately.
Right.
If we vote to not accept the recommendation to refuse, then someone will have to make a separate recommendation to approve it.
That's fine.
But it doesn't have to come back. It's already here. If you want to change it, you vote no to this recommendation.
Okay. Yeah, as I say, I voted against the recommendation to refuse, and that's what I'll do this evening.
Then if that's what you want to do, Councillor Pierce, then just keep your vote consistent and vote to not accept
Thank you.
this recommendation to refuse.
Councillor Chambers?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I too am not going to support the recommendation, and unfortunately I had to leave early and didn't have the opportunity to vote at the committee, but I won't be supporting the recommendation to refuse because I think it should be accepted. When staff acknowledge an error in actually writing, I think the delegation that stated it should be judged on the situation that should have been in place, which if we acknowledge an error, then we should accept that there was an error and act accordingly. I don't like telling people one thing and then pulling the rug out from under them, and I don't think the county should be doing that. And I think if we accept the recommendation to refuse, we're in essence doing that. We are going back on our written word, and we shouldn't do that. It's something that I don't do. Hopefully I don't do in my personal life, and I don't think the county should be doing here. If we acknowledge there's an error, and we judge it as if the error wasn't there. So I encourage everyone to not support this recommendation, and hopefully if it is rejected, then a motion to approve the recommendation, approve the application would be in order.
Councillor Coleman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too will not support the recommendation. I did not support it that night, and I will not support it again. And my counselor to my left, he sums it up so much better than I do, and I'll keep the words very short, but at the appropriate time, I'll ask to record a vote on item number 6.
Thank you. Councillor Wheat?
Yes, I'd like to apologize to Councillor Bell, because I was answering what, as if I was the chairman of the planning committee, and really that was your responsibility, and I apologize to you for explaining how that really works. I'm sorry.
No need. Again, my education is just going up and up today.
So Councillor Gatward?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I didn't support the refusal either. I don't think that we should be down designating this last little piece of estate residential along that road. I don't believe, because there's a creek there, that there's room for any more lots. I think one lot will be done, and then it's done and over with. If we refuse this tonight, I can see it going to the OMB and costing the county taxpayers all kinds of money.
Any other comments before? Okay, so we've separated number 6. We're going to first of all vote on everything but 6. So all those in favor of everything but 6? Yep. Okay, now we're going to call the vote. Heather, can you make the what we're voting on very clear? Can you? It's sort of a.
So we are currently voting on recommendation number 6, which is that application OPA A19DN and ZBA 2318DN be refused.
Everyone's clear? Nothing else to be said? All those in favor? Oh, recorded vote. Who starts? All those in favor? Opposed?
Motion is defeated.
Thank you.
Now we need.
Oh,
So now we either need a motion to approve or we need to send it back to planning, one or the other.
Councillor Coleman? Councillor Pierce, seconded. Yep. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Tricky but complete. Where are we? Community Services Report.
So, Community Services Committee report, September 9th, that the Community Services Committee report of September 9th, 2019 be approved. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor House.
Any questions to Councillor McAlpine? Seeing none. Oh, Councillor Gatward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like number 4 separated and a recorded vote.
Number 4 is being separated. So we're going to vote on 1, 2, and 3. Are there any questions to 1, 2, or 3? Councillor Howes, you look confused. You're okay? 1, 2, and 3. Approval for 1, 2, and 3. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Councillor Gatward, let's talk about number 4.
Thank you, Mayor Bailey. Well, this has been tossed around a lot, and I don't agree with, we went from 4 committees, 4 advisory committees, to a suggestion of 1, and now we're going to none. And how it got from 1 to none, I'm not sure, but it did, and I don't think this is listening to our volunteers and our residents. I don't like this model. I think that the committees were doing a lot of the work that's explained in the last paragraph, so I can't support it. And if we're going to disband this advisory committee, are we going to also do others?
Point of order, that's not what we're talking about here.
That's not on the agenda, but that will be next, in my opinion. Thank you.
Councillor Ferrier first.
That would only be next if that was the opinion of council, and I don't think it is. However, it's this idea of disbanding these committees, I think, is a misnomer, and I said this at the meeting, and unfortunately we weren't able to be there, but we're replacing the committees with another model where we're actually going to expand the scope, which is something that the volunteers specifically said they wanted. Quote unquote, more meat on the bone of what we need to do. So we'd be replacing it, just so everybody watching understands, we'd be replacing these committees with some ward-specific committees that would have a bigger scope, and also Parks and Rec committees or Parks and Rec ad hoc committees that are specific to change challenge to needs and specific projects, which would allow the folks who are volunteering to have specific projects, as opposed to the issues we've been having with quorum and them stating themselves they don't feel like they have enough to do that's meaningful.
Thank you. Councillor Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just for the benefit of Councillor Gatward, it's not going, I'm not sure where you got the idea it's going to none. It's going to 1. It's going from 4 committees to 1 committee. Let me read this for you, Councillor Gatward. And whereas the Recreation Master Plan 2017 recommended the County of Brant consider integrating its Parks and Recreation Advisory Committees and economizing the current structure from 4 committees to 1.
That's right, but it doesn't say that that be approved.
Let me read this again. The recommendation is the advisory committees economize the current structure from 4 committees to 1. And then it states in the last paragraph of there, the expanded scope of the 1 committee, as Councillor Ferrier spoke of. It is 1 committee, not no committees.
Well, that's not how the community has interpreted this motion.
Can you put your microphone on, please, Councillor Gatward?
Sorry.
Say it again, please.
That is not how the, a lot of people I have talked to and emailed me about this have interpreted this motion. So I'm including people from Paris. So I am glad that you clarified that, because it says disband the 4 Parks and Recreation and transition to a multifaceted public consultation system. It doesn't say under one committee, so perhaps we need to amend that paragraph, just for clarity.
Councillor Pierce?
Mr. Mayor, if I could, I was part of the Paris Parks and Rec Committee and was at all the meetings where this was all coming down. It was never stated that we're disbanding Parks and Rec committees. It was never stated that. It was always stated, first it was to one. We didn't like the one, so it was suggested possibly two. There was a west and the east. And then the recommendation is coming back as one. So it was never none.
I'd like to clarify.
Councillor Gatward?
Okay. I had a prominent parks person in Paris say to me, how did we get from 4 to 1 to none? So this recommendation needs to be clearer, because that's just not what I'm getting from a lot of volunteers. And I'm happy to hear that at least we still have one committee.
Thank you, Councillor Gatward. Councillor Ferrier?
Yeah, well, I'd like to read the specific, everybody's dancing around the last paragraph, but I'm going to read it so everybody understands where we're at. To transition to a multifaceted public consultation system for community service initiatives, including, and so this is multiple things that we would be adding to the sort of suite of consultation: area meetings, neighborhood panels, user advisory groups, digital advisory citizens, and a Sports Hall of Fame ad hoc committee. So we're actually seeing, again, multiple inputs for folks beyond the meetings that people have said they have had issues with. So I'm fully supportive of this and said so during the initial meeting.
Thank you. Councillor House?
Right, and I wanted to thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. I wanted to, for Councillor Gatward's benefit, you weren't at that meeting, and in that meeting, I just touched on the fact, because I've worked in my other job with parks and recreation groups in municipalities all over southwestern Ontario for the last 20 years, and I've seen new, innovative, and successful approaches to engaging the community. And on that basis, I was very comfortable in supporting this motion and will continue to do so.
Councillor Chambers?
And I agree with Councillor Howes. We need to do better in public consultation. A standalone committee is valuable, but there are more ways to do a consultation than having a meeting where somebody goes. There's virtual meetings. There's all kinds of different things, and you can glean public input in many, many ways. And we're not doing that now, and we should be. And this recommendation is telling us that we should. And before someone runs off and says that we are not supporting our community volunteers, we are encouraging our community volunteers to take part in user advisory groups, digital advisory citizen groups, neighborhood meetings, etc. Bring them all together, bring everybody out, and you get a better consultation on items as they come forward. This is a good resolution.
Thank you, Councillor Chambers. Councillor Gatward?
So I would like an amendment to the last paragraph, Mr. Mayor, to make it very clear that we transition to one committee with multifaceted and so on. Transition to one committee with, and then list all the things that are there.
Well, we'll see if we can get you a seconder, Councillor Gatward.
So that it's very clear, because there's a lot of residents and volunteers that think this is the end of, because it doesn't approve one committee, in my opinion. So that's why I want that motion to amend that, just to say transition to one committee with. So that, I'm moving that, and I'm seeking a seconder.
Councillor Bell, seconded. Councillor Pierce?
Mr. Mayor, I can't support this. It specifically states in the second paragraph we're going from 4 committees to 1. Councillor Gatward had suggested that she's received comments from somebody who was on the Paris Parks and Rec Committee regards to how do we go from 4 to 1 to none. I was on that committee. I haven't heard anything. The first time I've ever heard anything suggested that we're going to none is tonight by Councillor Gatward. It has always been 1. I'm not sure why we need to repeat ourselves in the 4th paragraph as it does the 2nd paragraph. We'll see how the vote goes now that it has a second.
Thank you. Councillor Laferriere.
The other thing to remember too is that when we talked about this at the committee level, we talked about the idea that we can try this. We can always go back if it doesn't work. If this is a horrible failure, and I don't think it will be, I think it'll be a big success. We can always change it and adapt it and adopt it. Holding on to something, when Councillor Gatward said she doesn't like this system, how does she know? We haven't tried it, right? It's just a proposal, but we can always go back, and that's part of it as well. I won't be supporting the amendment.
Thank you. Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't think Councillor Gatwood's actually opposed the idea of going from 4 to 1. She just wants clarification. And I just wonder how much we give up by putting those extra few words in the resolution. Because the whereases are all set in context. It's the final paragraph that actually says what's going to happen.
Okay, well, Councillor Gatward is looking for an amendment, and it's been seconded. Let's vote on that first. All those in favor of amending it? Opposed? Okay, so it stays as written. Thank you for your input, Councillor Gatward. We'll call the vote on number 4 as it's written. All those in favor? Opposed?
There was a request for a recorded vote.
Okay, recorded vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And carried. Thank you. Oh, Michael, if you could introduce our guests.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would indulge council for one moment to make a couple of acknowledgements. Here in attendance regarding item 2 on the Community Services agenda is District Chief Wade Comerson from the Canesville Fire Hall and District Chief Brent Kane from the Airport Fire Hall. Both have been impacted by cancer, and we're pleased that they're here this evening, and I'm sure they'll carry council support for item 2 on the Community Services agenda back to our 185 volunteer firefighters. So thank you, Your Worship, for allowing me to do that.
Thank you, and thank you for coming tonight to show support. I'm sorry I didn't acknowledge you earlier. I didn't know why you were here. Corporate Development Report.
Moved by myself, second by Councillor Coleman, that the Corporate Development Committee report of September 9th, 2019 be approved, noting that there are 12 recommendations, Mr. Mayor.
Any questions? Anything to be separated? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed and carried. Public Works, Councillor Gatward.
It's moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Coleman, that the Public Works report of September 10th be approved, and we are approving items 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6. And 5 is separated, and I'll ask the Vice Chair to call the question on and vote on that, because I've declared a conflict.
Thank you. Councillor Pierce.
I would also like number 2 pulled for a question. And I also have a question on 5 as well.
Okay. So 1, 3, and 4 are cleared. All those in favor? And 6?
And 6.
All those in favor? Okay, so let's go back to number 5 first, please. Councillor Coleman?
The recommendation is in front of you, Mr. Mayor, so.
Councillor Pierce?
Yeah, so this is questions because Councillor Gatward's got, okay.
Yeah.
So a question on number 5. So it talks about 2 additional winter maintenance operators for overnight operations for 1920. My question is, are these snowplow drivers? And if that's the case, what is the plan for these additional staff to do overnight when there's no snow activity?
I'm going to refer that question to the general manager.
Yeah.
We're just waiting to answer this question.
Through the mayor to Councillor Pierce. So yes, these are in the overnight operations. We already have overnight operations. This would be expanding them using the equipment we have, which would be sitting idle and just adding the labor to do that. Yes, there are some nights when we aren't actually out there plowing, and we would put them to work at other duties in the shop, repairing equipment, the like. You don't get 100% efficiency out of these jobs on every night, but it's when you do need them, it is well worthwhile and a very good investment in winter maintenance at a fairly low cost.
Good answer.
Any other questions? Councillor Coleman, no?
That's for
Okay.
number, that's just for 5, right?
Yeah, this is just for 5. All those in favor? Opposed? And carried. We're going back to 2. Councillor Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, this is great news that we're getting a couple more of these sidewalk utility tractors. That's fantastic. Just for clarification, what is the total number of these we have now? Is it 3 or 4 with these additional 2?
Councillor Gatward.
I'm not sure, so I'll refer it to the general manager.
Okay. Come on back up.
We actually talked of this a little bit in the winter debriefing report too, and we're trading equipment, so we're not getting any more.
Okay, so my apologies on that, Mr. Mayor. I didn't see that in the report. I just saw that there was 2. Okay, so we're going to be staying at 2 then.
Yeah.
That's right, and through the winter debriefing report, they are sort of tied together. We're talking of, if we are making changes to that actual operation, we need to do a lot more homework and a lot more consultation, and if changes are gonna come, we need more time than for this winter season.
Okay, because I was kind of thinking that was going to be fantastic news, that we were going to have 4 of these things and our sidewalks would be all cleared.
Sorry.
I guess we could use those 2 overnight staff to work on them on the nights that we don't have, but thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, we're going to vote on number 2. All those in favor to receive? Thank you. John Noble Home Committee. Councillor Gatward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Wheat, that the John Noble Home Committee of Management report of September 11th be approved. And there is
2 items.
2 items, and I'd like to comment regarding the information in the minutes about the budget
All right,
when the time comes.
okay. All those in favor to receive? Opposed? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You'll note that our budget increase is going to be higher this year. Last year it was very low, but unfortunately our 2% increase that we normally get from the ministry was cut by 50%, and so we only get 1% now, and we have to find efficiencies, and basically the costs have been downloaded to the municipality. So that's all I have to say, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Number F, Paramedic Services Committee minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor McAlpine. It's hard to read your handwriting. 8F, Paramedic Services Committee minutes of September 18th, 2019 be received as information as there are no recommendations.
Great. All those in favor to receive? Thank you, Mark. Staff reports. Nine A.
Mr. Mayor, it's moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Pierce that the recommendation as presented in the agenda be approved regarding this 2018 surplus.
Any questions, Councillor Chamber? Seeing none, all those in favor? Thank you. 9B.
Moved by myself, second by Councillor Gatward, that the County of Brant enter into a 2-year contract extension with Melinda Monroe for the provision of integrity commissioner services for the County of Brant Code of Conduct, the Municipal Act, and the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act.
Any comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? 2-year contract? Thank you. Information reports, seeing none. Communications, 11A, Councillor Wheat.
It's moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Coleman. A letter from Sherry Gibaldi concerning rezoning application ZBA 1117, 19 MD at 1519 Comer Street needs to be received.
Any comments to Councillor Wheat? Councillor Bell?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At the time this came up at the Planning Advisory Committee, I thought we were clear that Ms. Gibaldi could work with county staff, and I think Mr. Snodgrass even offered to help to make sure that the requirements of that particular neighbour to avoid any noise would be met as far as was possible. So I think I would just encourage that we write back to Ms. Gibaldi and say, please take up the recommendation that, or the offer that was made in the Planning Advisory Committee.
Okay, with that addition, Councillor Gatward?
Thank you, yes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I spoke to this resident on the phone after our last planning meeting, and I've also spoken to the planner that has the file about the best way to mitigate transport truck noise on her property. She was there first, and when the site plan that's been bumped up comes back, we can look at that to make sure that her property isn't negatively impacted. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gatward. With that all being noted, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. B, Councillor McAlpine.
Okay, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Pierce, that the Brant Family and Children's Services request for proclamation of October as Child Abuse Prevention Month be approved.
Any questions for Councillor McAlpine? Seeing none, all those in favor to receive? Thank you. It's all the same. Councillor Gatward?
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. 11B wasn't just to receive, it was to proclaim October as Child Abuse Prevention Month, and Thursday, October 24th, as Dress Purple Day. So Heather will be preparing a proclamation for yours. Yeah, yeah, but the mayor said we received it. But thank you.
We need to proclaim it. I now proclaim it. Smile, Joan. There you go.
I'll wear purple.
There you go. Councillor Miller. Notice of motion for Earth Day.
No, we have to see it.
Wait, yeah, we still got
Where's
11.
the additions?
C, D, and E.
Oh, I have to flip it over, sorry. Yeah. So the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Building Code Transportation Consultation.
Information consultation.
Yeah. Motion to receive. All those in favor? D, Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. Motion to receive. Oh, sorry, Councillor Miller.
Mr. Mayor, I will make a motion to receive, but I also like to make a motion to refer it to staff for a response to the consultation they're asking, especially in light of the fact that we have so much aggregate here in the county.
Seconded by Mark. Thank you for that. All those in favor? County of Brant Public Library request for proclamation for October as Love Your Library Month. Councillor House?
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Pierce.
to approve the County of Brant Public Library's request for proclamation of October as Love Your Library Month in Brant County. Do you want me to read the whole thing?
No, I think I get the drift.
We're proclaiming it.
Yeah, we're proclaiming it. Any questions to Councillor House? All those in favor? Thank you. My pages are up. I think I've got my... Yeah, it's over here. Yeah, so the questions, are there any questions? I have something to report. I was speaking to the school board today to make sure that the flags are going to be put in the county, so for specialized days that we proclaim. I was talking to Greg Anderson today from the Grand River, and he's going to make sure that we have the second flagpole where we need it so that we don't need to take down the Canadian flag for all of these days that we're going to acknowledge. So I just sort of reminded him today that they had told us last year that they were going to install a second flagpole, at least at the high school this year, and other schools looking down the road. So that's just something I did today, and I think it's a good place to put it, so I did. 13 is the resolutions. Councillor Ferrier.
Yes, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Pierce. 13A, the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund. That this resolution be carried. I can read it if requested, but everybody here has read it, I hope.
I think you should. I think if you could read it.
Sure. Whereas there are 667 households on the affordable housing waitlist that have selected properties in the county of Brant, and whereas there are only 96 units of rent geared to income affordable rental properties located within the county of Brant, and whereas funding opportunities to help increase the affordable housing stock usually require a municipal contribution equal to 25% of the project cost, and whereas the recent completion of the John Noble Home Apartments in the city of Brantford by the Brantford Local Housing Corporation will result in a net annual surplus, a portion of which is returned to the county of Brant. And whereas the county of Brant does not have a reserve fund established for the purposes of affordable housing, and whereas the county of Brant from time to time disposes of county-owned properties deemed to be surplus to the county's needs, therefore be it resolved that the county of Brant establish an affordable housing reserve fund for the purposes of contributing to the costs of future development of mixed income housing in the county of Brant in accordance with the program funded or delivered by the province of Ontario or the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. That the county of Brant portion of the net annual surplus after financing costs from the John Noble Home Apartments be deposited into the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund, and that 25% of the net proceeds from the sale of any County of Brant-owned property deemed to be surplus to the county's needs, with the exception of property sale proceeds that have been already designated for specific uses, be deposited into the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund.
That's great. Any questions to Councillor Ferrier? Councillor Chambers?
Knew where to look.
Has the county treasurer been consulted on this?
It's been in the official documents. We've worked on this for months, and the answer is yes. Also, Brant Municipal Enterprises has been consulted as well and are very supportive.
Thank you. Any other questions to Councillor Miller?
I just want to say, I think it's a good motion, and I can't believe we waited this long to get a reserve fund for affordable housing, so I appreciate Councillor Ferrier bringing this forward.
Councillor Chambers.
Yes, just to comment, I'm not going to support the resolution. The reason we haven't had one is because we've never needed one. We've always been able to fund by taking from established reserves or financing in alternative ways. I think it's appropriate to say that if you don't support this resolution, that's not saying you don't recognize the need for affordable housing. I think you would agree with that. Just because you're not supporting of establishing a reserve fund does not mean you don't support the need for more affordable housing units. So I don't want to be accused of being against affordable housing, or I don't want to be accused against being against trying to encourage more units of affordable housing. But really, this is a motion about finance. It's about how to finance the affordable housing. It's not about whether affordable housing is good, bad, or otherwise. It's not about whether we need or don't need. It's about how we finance that. And really, it's two or three things about, and I'm not an expert at municipal finance, don't get me wrong, but I do know a few things, and I've always said that the best place for reserves to be are in the taxpayers' pockets. There's no sense in pulling money out of the taxpayers and putting it in a pile if it's not required. There's appropriate times to do that, and there's appropriate times not to do that. This resolution is just manipulating reserve funds. It's taking money out of one reserve fund and putting it in another. And what it's doing is taking money from a reserve fund that can be used for other things and putting it in a dedicated reserve fund to be used for a specific purpose. And that ties that up for that specific purpose. The way to do that for the specific purpose when that arises is to take it out of the reserve, contingency reserves at that time, not taking it and putting in the pile, because you can't take it the other way if needed. So, number one, I recognize that we need more affordable housing units, so don't accuse me of being against that. Number two, I support any way that we can to encourage to have more affordable housing units, but I don't think it's necessary to establish a reserve fund, take money out of contingencies where it may be required elsewhere, and putting it into a dedicated reserve fund for a specific purpose that we've never needed in the past. So you can play the reserve game, shell game if you want, and support this, but the proper place for reserves to be is in a contingency reserve or the taxpayers' pockets, and finance things when they come forward. That's usually how projects such as John Noble Home expansions and this kind of stuff happen. So I'm not supportive of this recommendation at all.
Thank you, Councillor Chambers. Councillor Bell.
Do I get to speak to that? Was the question to the...
All right, if you feel better speaking to it.
Sure, I don't plan on accusing anybody of anything, though it sounds a little bit like I was accused of playing a shell game, which isn't really the accusation you want at a professional council meeting. However, many municipalities have a housing reserve fund. Most of our neighboring municipalities have a housing reserve fund. Over 100 communities in Ontario alone have a housing reserve fund. And yes, for the specific purpose of setting money aside for something that is seen as valuable and needed by many in the community. In addition to that, what we see here are some opportunities to put money into that reserve that are fairly painless to the taxpayer, but it doesn't preclude other opportunities that we may have, such as taking other surpluses and putting them in the future. If we ever have inclusionary zoning in the county, that money actually being a benefit to the developer because they may be able to do cash in lieu into a reserve fund that instead of having 4 or 5 units out of 100, they could take that cash and we could use that to amplify that money using provincial and federal dollars that we would be able to receive by showing evidence of the ability to fund them. And it takes it out of the debt game, right, which is a game in and of itself.
Thank you. Councillor Bell.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the need is huge. You and I and Mark attended a conference, a conversation on homelessness in Brantford, Brant, and it's quite clear that the experts in this field recognize the answer to the problem is housing first, affordable housing. In the last 10 years, we've literally stood still in the combination of the city and the county. We have not added to the affordable housing stock in those 10 years. We need to show leadership in our county. That was a message that came across yesterday. The problem is that homelessness is just as great in the county as it is in the city, and we need to recognise that, and we need to stand up and lead it. And this is one opportunity to show leadership. I don't know where it will go, where the money will go initially. There are lots of opportunities, and we have people on that waiting list, as Mark indicated, that are desperate for housing.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. Councillor House.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you. I'm echoing a little bit about what Councillor Bell said. I was 13 years old when the Trillium buildings were built here in Paris, and we have not increased much of our affordable housing stock since then. And to use some of Councillor Chambers' words, in the complete opposite vein, the idea of a dedicated pile of funds specifically tied up for this purpose, I think is great for our community. So I plan to support it wholeheartedly.
Thank you, Councillor House. Councillor Wheat.
No, I'm not supporting it. I'll try and be brief, but we support this through social services. A lot of your tax dollars are already going to social services. We don't need to be putting any money aside. City of Brantford, we have a great working relationship with the City of Brantford. They administer our social services. And classic example was a few years ago when we, the county, wanted to put an addition on Russell Heights. And the City of Brantford administered how that would happen. Consequently, the two buildings were built on Park Road and fine and dandy. But they administer that. And we contribute it through social services, through your tax dollars. We don't need to be putting money aside that the city is going to administer.
They do administer that. However, they've also helped with the making of this resolution and have recommended it. They have one as well, even though they pay into social services as well. And let's not forget that it wasn't that long ago that the City of Brantford denied something that was approved at social services for this sort of housing in St. George. By having some dedicated funds of our own, we are controlling our destiny a little bit more in those terms, so that we can make the case that we are also doing equal to what they're doing in terms of public housing funding.
Councillor Chambers.
That needs to be clarified, what you just said about the county going on its own in public housing, because I don't think that's quite correct. We are, the affordable housing is carried out jointly, and it is the service provider of the City of Brantford that essentially makes the decisions. Now, if I understand what you're saying is that we are going to establish a pile of money and then we're going to go on our own and start building affordable housing because there's such a great need. Is that what you're implying?
No, it's not what I'm implying. If
Okay.
you'd like me to answer the question, because again, the City of Brantford has a reserve fund as well, and they aren't going on their own when they create new affordable housing units. However, they increase the capacity of their community to have more input on how that might work out, and they increase the capacity just broadly on being able to apply for funding with the Social Services Joint Committee that I sit on in order to do that. They show an ability to increase that capacity using their reserve fund. In no way are they going on their own when they do it.
Councillor Chambers.
So somehow having a pile of money is going to increase affordable housing units?
Yes, because housing costs money.
I understand that, but just to have the pile of money in a reserve, how does that?
Because we were able to apply for grants and other funds.
Are the grants conditional upon having a pile of money? No, they're not. That's incorrect.
Mr. Mayor, point of order. This is a good discussion that needs to be had, but this sounds like a discussion between two councillors here. Nothing, I don't know if they forgot you were sitting up at the table there, but this is now going back and forth between two councillors.
Okay, thank you. And we'll stop that there, and we're going to call on Councillor Gatward for the third person in.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I can remember a year ago when Joanne Tanis was here and other housing staff and stood at the podium and talked about this topic. They suggested, or strongly suggested, that we should try and set aside some reserve funds. We've never done that, as Councillor Chambers has said. but I do believe that having some funding in a separate pot is a good idea. Right now, if we sell a surplus property, it goes into a property fund that's used for buying and selling. At least that's my understanding, unless it's changed and I wasn't aware. But that 25%, if we sell a $100,000 lot, that $100,000 goes in that property fund. And as Councillor Chambers said, you're just playing the shell game with the funding. It's still sitting there, whether it's in the property reserve or whether it's in the housing reserve. So I think it's a great idea. And I do think that there could be projects coming forward in the future. We do have some affordable housing down on Grand River Street and then Trillium Way. And there's expansion to be done at Trillium Way, is my understanding. And I'm not sure when that'll come forward, but it would be better than to have a pot of money than put it into debt.
Thank you. Councillor Miller.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, Councillor Gatwood brought it up, but social services staff did say that they would really appreciate if the county established this particular reserve fund because we don't have it. Speaking to reserve funds, I mean, we have reserve funds for ambulance, cross-border, ambulance equipment, ambulance fire station, ambulance general, ambulance vehicle. We have reserve funds for the Brant Trail improvement, river access, capital expenditures, cemetery land purchase, closure and post-closure of the solid waste facility reserve, community services, contingency rate stabilization, corporate services, development service. Anyways, you get the point. We have about 30 different reserve funds. So I think if we had another one, I don't think we're playing a shell game. We're just doing what I think we should have done a long time ago.
Anything else before we vote? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. I'm going to call a 5-minute recess.
Meeting's almost done.
We're going to go to B, Earth Day. Councillor Miller.
Fingers crossed this one's not as controversial. Moved by myself, second by Councillor Gatwood. Whereas the benefits from trees are self-evident, whereas the forest canopy of the county of Brant has been negatively impacted by the emerald ash borer, and whereas April 22nd, 2020 will be the 50th anniversary of the first Earth Day that the county of Brant, in celebration of this event, undertake to plant 50 trees in each of the 5 wards for a total of 250 trees on or around April 22nd, 2020, with the locations and species to be determined by staff with input from council.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments to Councillor Miller? Seeing none, all those in, Councillor Miller?
I just...
Councillor Miller.
Question of himself.
Questioning yourself.
A comment. And, you know, we all know Chuck Beach is a very environmentally friendly. He comes every April and he presents all those community groups. And he challenged us this year at our CDC. At the 50th anniversary, what are you guys as the county doing? So I'm hoping we can support this and make our county a better place to live.
Any other questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Councillor Gatwood.
I just wanted to say, Mr. Mayor, I hope we can plant, not the little whippets or saplings. We want to plant some 4 or 5 foot trees that will not die the first year. Thank you.
Great big monster trees, Joan. Yeah. Perfect. All those in favor of great big trees? Great, thank you. Cedar Street, notice recognizing that Councillor Bell has a conflict of interest. Councillor Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Howes. Do you want me to read the entire recommendation?
If you like.
Sure. Whereas Cedar Street in the town of Paris received water and wastewater services in 2006, and whereas at the time the extension of water and wastewater services, area residents requested Cedar Street not be further urbanized. And whereas following the extension of water and wastewater services, many parcels of land adjoining Cedar Street were developed, resulting in at least a 5-fold increase in the number of residents who were living or adjoining Cedar Street. And whereas the members of the County Council have received a large number of requests from residents living on or adjoining Cedar Street to improve the urban services, including stormwater management, street lights, road improvements, traffic calming, and sidewalks. And whereas there are 2 new developments are currently proposed or contemplated for Cedar Street, therefore the staff be directed to include a project in the 2020 base capital budget to urbanize Cedar Street in Paris. And that staff further be directed to commence with the public consultations and studies required for the design of an urbanized Cedar Street using available funding in the 2019 budget.
Thank you. Any questions? Councillor Gatward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Shouldn't the funding come from the developers and not the taxpayers? I see that you're telling us there's 2 additional developments, and that's what's causing the need to urbanize this area. So I guess I'd like to ask Mr. Mayor, staff, if that's what the case will be, that development charges will help fund this and not just the county public works budget.
Councillor Pierce, do you have anything to add first?
Well, for starters, clarification, I'm not stating in this that the 2 that are on the books coming are the result and causing this to be urbanized. What's causing this to be urbanized is the fact that, let's go back 10 years ago where there was 15 houses on Cedar Street. Now there's over 100. So if we're going to look at charging the developers to do that, I think we've kind of missed the boat on that.
Councillor Gatward.
Well, I don't agree. I think the new developments can help pay for the urbanization. It's going to cost a lot of money, and I'd like to know before we vote on this, because it didn't come to Public Works for discussion first. It came directly here. I'd like to know from staff what the approximate estimate of costs would be. It's my understanding they were planning to bring a report to the October Public Works meeting on this very item. So I'd like to hear from Mr. Walton, if I could, the general manager.
Yep, Mr. Walton.
Through the mayor to Councillor Gatward. In the 2020 budget, which we are currently preparing, we will put in there what the sources of funding, an estimated cost for this project and the sources of funding. There would be some requested from developers for frontage development. It will be a relatively small piece of the cost, though. The majority of Cedar Street does not have new development in these 2 new developments on it. There will be some cost sharing on the drainage anticipated, and we've got some heavy work to do in the next couple of weeks to figure out what this might cost for the 2020 budget.
Councillor Gatward, that answers your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Councillor Miller?
I don't like running the county by motions like this. Things like this belong with staff, with Public Works, because they're the ones that are putting the pieces together. And I would rather have seen this referred to staff and say, can you please let us know how you can make this happen? Give us the costs. Right now, we're saying, well, let's just throw that in the budget, and everything else goes out the window. There's other balls in the air besides Cedar Street in the county. And like I said, I'd rather this was referred to staff, let them look at it, let them come back with a report, and so forth. Having said that, I also attended all the public meetings on Cedar Street. They were led by Joe Murphy at the time, about what the residents wanted. And obviously, at that time, the overwhelming consensus was they liked it the way it was. They wanted to keep the trees. Now, I understand there's been growth. I got that. But at the same time, and again, that's why I would like to refer it to staff, let them look at it, and even our general manager of Public Works acknowledged that there's a lot of work that needs to be done to make this happen. So I'm not going to support this motion that we throw it on the 2020 budget and we start using money from our 2019 budget, which has already been determined months ago. I won't support it, but I will support referring it to staff.
Thank you. Councillor Wheat.
Each subcommittee has a section, matters referred from council. This is a classic example, refer this to Public Works. It's in every committee. Both section 13 or 14 says matters referred from council. And this needs to go to Public Works.
With that being said, let's take the vote on the resolution. Councillor Chambers?
I'm just going to suggest an amendment, if I might, and I agree with the thrust of where Councillor Pierce is going on this, because the Cedar Street has changed considerably since the people wanted to keep the trees. I'm just wondering if the words "for consideration" might be added at the second to the bottom paragraph. Therefore, that staff be directed to include a project for the 2020 base capital budget to urbanize Cedar Street in Paris for consideration. What that does, that puts it up there as a direction of this council, and it still allows for prioritization and those matters to be dealt with when we look at the budget as a whole. But this puts it there, and I think it needs to be there, so that I support that aspect of it. But I still would like to look at it in context with the other projects that might be equally as deserving, and that's what budgeting is all about. So that's my suggestion for an amendment. It could be a friendly amendment if the mover would concur, and while he's considering that, put that for his consideration. I will say that it would only seem natural that staff should be looking now at the future of Cedar Street in terms of what needs to be done, because we all recognize that things need to be done. So the last part of that resolution, I believe, is something that should be taking place ongoing at the staff level. But that's my suggestion, how I would support the motion. I'll use that as an amendment, then I'll propose an amendment that the words "for consideration" be added to the second from the last operative clause. Therefore, that staff be directed to include a project for consideration in the 2020 base capital budget to urbanize Cedar Street in Paris.
Thank you. Councillor Pierce, how do you receive that?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, a couple things on that. First off, the gist behind that, as you mentioned, Councillor Chambers, that everything on a budget is there for consideration. So what's being suggested here is that we put something on the 2020 budget as a project for Cedar Street to be considered, as everything else is on the budget. So if it would suit better to add that for consideration on there, but that, to me, everything that's on a budget is for consideration, that nothing is for sure. And as far as just if I could with Cedar Street here, it's been a discussion as long as I've been on council for 2 terms as to, maybe we should have just done it in the first place. But you can guarantee that every rainstorm now, Councillor Bell and myself are getting emails with pictures of what's happening to Cedar Street. We've discussed before that we need to do something, and that's part and parcel of why this motion is coming forward. So again, the whole gist of it was to put it on the budget for consideration. If that needs to be stated in there, then I would be okay with that friendly amendment, looking for the seconder if he would be, if that makes it better.
And that's just a clarification. I thought that's what you were getting at. That way it's put in context with the other projects. It's not, there it is, it's on, we can't change it kind of thing. So
no, absolutely.
So you're okay with that friendly amendment?
I'm okay with it as it is, but if it makes it easier because everything on the budget is considered, then that's fine.
I think it's going to serve your resolution well if you accept it. So, Councillor Gatward.
Thank you. Well, I agree with Councillor Miller and Councillor Weed about referring this to Public Works so that they can do a proper report. We don't know if this is going to cost $500,000 or $800,000 or $300,000.
Mr. Mayor, if I may interject here, that's why the paragraph states, therefore that staff be directed to include a project. That will, in that project, will state exactly what it's gonna cost. That's what the project is for Cedar Street. How much is it gonna cost? What would it entail? How long would it take? Who's gonna be involved? That's part of the project.
So is that report gonna come to us before it goes to budget? No,
No, it's going to budget.
no, that's right, and
I,
I think it's jumping the queue, but that's my opinion, that it should be deferred back to Public Works.
Councillor Coleman,
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I support this. I like the wording that Councillor Chambers has suggested as a friendly amendment. This is 13 years ago, this should have been done. And I'll guarantee you, it won't get done next year because there'll be some opposition somewhere along the line of somebody doesn't want to lose trees or whatever. But I support this project wholly. I tried to get it through 13 years ago. Let's move on.
thank you, Councillor Coleman. Any other discussion before we call the vote? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. D, notice of motion, policing, Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I will read it.
Point of order, I don't like to be read to, Brian,
Well, that's fine.
because I read it.
I've learned reading by going to the library now and again, John, so
Attaboy, well,
I had that problem when I got on council that I couldn't get it all read, but now I can really get it all out now, so I would really like to show my opportunity to read this to you, so everybody understands what the motion is.
I will listen intently.
Thank you.
I would love to hear you read it.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Moved by myself, second by Councillor House. And you don't have the greatest penmanship, Mr. House. Thank you. Whereas policing service in the county of Brant, in the Brant County, is currently provided by Ontario Provincial Police under a contract between Her Majesty the Queen and Right of Ontario as represented by the Minister of Community Safety and Correctional Services and the Corporation of the County of Brant. And whereas this contract expires on December 31st, 2019, and whereas there are concerns being expressed by many residents of the community regarding the responsibilities, effectiveness, and appropriateness of the policing being provided to the county by the OPP, and whereas prior to renewing the contract for the continuation of policing by the OPP, it is prudent for the council to examine other options for policing within the county of Brant. And whereas the county is experiencing a period of tremendous population growth, which may lead to a change in the way that policing services are delivered to county residents. And whereas the county is in the process of constructing a modern, municipally owned police facility, which has been designed to adequately house police resources necessary to provide policing to the residents of the county. Therefore, that staff be directed to bring forward a brief and concise examination of the following police options for the county. Number one, continued delivery of the policing service by the OPP, with the purchase of additional OPP service to address service concerns. Number two, development and deployment of an independent county police force. And three, contracting police services for the county with an adjoining municipal police force, such as whether it's City of Brantford, Region of Waterloo, or the City of Hamilton, or whoever. That this report be brought to the October Corporate Development Committee meeting for consideration, and then this resolution does not impugn or detract from the service, dedication, and bravery of the individual officers of the OPP who work to keep the residents of the county safe.
Any questions or comments? Councillor Bell.
Yeah, I'm going to support this motion. I've received so many requests from residents asking for more visible policing and more resources addressing things like speeding and traffic issues. Just last week or the week before, I observed 9 different types of traffic infractions in downtown Paris, and Michael advised me that 6 out of those 9 were actually issues that had to be dealt with through the Highway Traffic Act. And I see little evidence of the current OPP resources being applied to that kind of work, which is really important and valued by the community. Likewise, the statistics shared at the Police Services Board and the Community Services Committee show a continuing year-on-year reduction in the number of foot patrol hours, in the number of charges laid. All of these things are not satisfying our residents who look for more visible policing presence. And that visible policing presence is actually going to reduce as we move the police headquarters from downtown Paris to close by the 403. So we've been advised by the OPP detachment that speeding is not a high priority to them. Well, it's a high priority to our residents. And the perceived dangers of speeding and other traffic-related incidents, it's a daily reality for our residents. And they're looking for us, their elected officials, to make a change, to bring something forward that takes action. So to conduct a review of our options and alternatives for policing in the county as we approach contract renegotiation time, it's only 2 or 3 months away that we have to get this sorted by. It's really timely, it's really appropriate, it's just due diligence on the part of us as a council to do this on behalf of our residents. We may conclude that the current policing arrangement is optimal, but I doubt it. And I think what we may find is that if we keep the OPP as a provider, we're going to have to recognise we're going to have to enlarge their scope, put in more money to meet the requirements, if that is the case, if that's what the report provides. Again, I support us conducting this due diligence expected of us by residents, and I support the motion.
Councillor Ferrier.
Yeah, this is my area of expertise in terms of my teaching, and I am troubled by the stats that show foot patrol, zone duty hours, and some cruiser patrol hour issues, and I just think that needs to be addressed broadly. I don't think it's going to lead to us changing service providers, but I do think it'll help shed a light on some of the issues that residents are experiencing and we're experiencing as well. That said, and I do love the last line here about it not impinging the OPP, because that's not what we're trying to do. There's a lot of amazing things that the OPP are doing, including their work with mental health, their work with a number of community improvement work they do, the town halls. They've been very responsive, but I do think we need more data from staff side in order to direct them as effectively as possible. And also to look at the other options, because that is part of due diligence, and it does come up in the community. People do remember when we had different police forces, and I explain that that's not necessarily optimal, but I think either way that needs to be in writing, and we need to see what all of our suite of options are. So I will be supporting this resolution.
Any other comments or concerns? Councillor Gatward.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I was shocked when this came forward because it should have come to CDC first. But it's here at council directly out of the blue, and we all know that speeding's an issue in the county, and I don't agree that our force does not take speeding seriously or as a priority. They're concentrating on some high-speed roads to keep the number of deaths down in our community. And in case you missed it, there was an article in the paper last Friday that said how good that strategy was working. We've had no deaths this year, and we're working on the accident areas in the county to improve people being hit by impaired drivers, by alcohol or drugs. The requested protocol is if you have a problem, you should go to Inspector Anderson and speak to her about it. We now have a website where residents can come with their complaints. I think that we've been very proactive in addressing the community's concerns. There's new tools available on speeding. We all know that we have 4 speed spies and the OPP has 2. They know exactly where the problem areas are, and they set up focus patrols. Recently, I came up with an idea for the crosswalks in Paris, because everybody complains about how the traffic gets bogged down in Paris, and then they get through Paris and speed up Grand River Street North. Well, nobody's asked what I think, or the Police Services Board, or asked Inspector Anderson. She came from traffic in South West region, and she was an inspector in traffic. She has a lot of valuable knowledge. Anyway, interestingly enough, the motion says that there's been many complaints. You mentioned several. I'm not sure how many times the people around this table have called Inspector Anderson, but the person that has his name on the motion has never called her. And I think that we need to communicate better. And the motion speaks to responsiveness, effectiveness, and appropriateness. And I really took exception to those comments, because our latest community satisfaction survey that was done by an independent survey company, and more than half of the people were in the town that responded to this survey, 56%, 16% were from villages, Mr. Mayor, and 26% were from the rural areas in the county. And they were asked where they lived. It's separated by male and female and by age group. If you want more information, it's available for everyone to look at. 97.7% of the respondents said they felt very safe in their community. 88.7% of the respondents said the OPP were very involved or somewhat involved in their community. 91.8% of the respondents were very satisfied or satisfied with the OPP's ability to work with communities to solve local problems. And last, and these are just highlights, there's 35 pages in this survey. 89.4% of the respondents were very satisfied or satisfied with the OPP's visibility in their community. 89.9% of respondents were very satisfied or satisfied with the OPP's visibility on the highways. Sure, there's those that grumble and say we never see them, but they're out there and they're not everywhere all at once. And our inspector has only been here for a year. She's held those 4 town hall meetings. She's in the process of revitalizing our community policing groups. There is a new program coming soon involving the high school students as being ambassadors and working in the downtown, where there seems to be concern about no foot patrols. And so I have to go on and say that I want to talk about the costs. The costs for our OPP service have decreased 31%. 31% since 2014 with the new OPP billing model. These costs have brought a yearly reduction from $7.6 million in 2014 to under $5.3 million in 2018. It has resulted in $8 million of savings for the county. Now, we didn't take that and put it in a reserve for our new detachment. We spent it. The average provincial cost for municipal policing, and we're talking in this motion about a municipal force or looking at using a municipal force, the average cost is $800 a property. You know what our costs are? $360 a property. So it's going to cost more than double to have a municipal force, let alone the cost to set up one here, if we decided to do that. When I looked at the Region of Waterloo's website, the hierarchy that they have for a population of 575,000 people is incredible. They have 1,090 officers in Waterloo. Brant, our own little County of Brant, OPP, have 55 officers. Now, do you want those 1,090 officers here coming through our community when there's a call? Do you think they're going to be out in foot patrol? I very much doubt it. The budget for Waterloo Region is, including capital, is $202 million plus. The budget for Hamilton is $178 million plus. The union in Hamilton said last fall that their staffing was in a crisis situation, and Hamilton is trying to hire this year 27 new officers. So if we think we're going to get improved service from these services, they have their own issues. The city of Cambridge wrote a letter to Waterloo Region asking for more resources in their community for the city of Cambridge. So they're not happy either with their police service. So in my opinion, we get good service for our $5.3 million, and our costs are stable. We have all kinds of programs. Community Safety Services Guide, I don't know if anybody's seen this, but it lists all the programs that are happening, and most of them are happening in our community. Now, are we going to get those programs from Hamilton or Waterloo? I doubt it very much. Our services in the city are integrated. Mental health, the BGH, they're all integrated with our roundtables and the OPP here in our own Brant County. We can certainly direct staff to negotiate an additional or enhancement for our contract. If we talked about a traffic officer at budget last year, we could easily negotiate that into the contract, effective for January 1st. But to have staff go to all this work when the numbers are there, I don't know about you, but I don't want to pay over double what we're paying now. If we have to pay over $10 million for policing, then our taxes are going to go way up. And you know what? The city pays over $33 million. It's their highest budget item for their policing. So we have a good deal here, and if we're not happy, Mr. Mayor, we need to communicate and create a more effective and collaborative atmosphere with our detachment, and we can make Brant better. We have a lower crime rate severity index here, and I'm sorry, but I cannot support this motion. We should defeat it, make another motion to direct staff to negotiate an enhanced contract with the OPP. Thank you.
No, that was very well presented, Councillor Gatward. Councillor Coleman.
I'm not going to argue, but I will say one thing. I have talked to Inspector Anderson. I have met with her in her office, and I take that as an, I don't want to use the wrong wording, but you said something that's not true. And I have spoke to Inspector Anderson. She has not returned my calls sometimes, but I have been in her office, and so don't ever say I have. Because when you said my name's on the top of it, you raised my dandruff up.
Councillor Gatward.
Thank you. And yes, we were all invited to her office, and most of us went and had a talk with her when she first came. She wanted to interact with all of council and make sure if you had concerns, you would bring them to her. So I know you were in her office, and I didn't say that.
Councillor Pierce.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's a tough act to follow there, Councillor Gatwork. I can see you're quite passionate about this, and that's not a bad thing. But if I may, a couple things that you said there throughout your response there, you had me believing, and I think maybe you had others around this table believing that the only option was to go somewhere else. Every comment you made was, well, if we go here, we're not going to get this, and we go here, we're not going to get this. Option number one on here, Councillor Gatward, if you were to look at this, please put this in front of you and read it. Option number one is continued delivery of policing services by the OPP. That's not number three, it's not number two, it's number one on the list. So nowhere in here did it state that we were disbanding the OPP and going elsewhere. What it stated as due diligence is what we should do is a brief and concise examination. That's what we're looking for here. The stats that you were pulling from Waterloo and Hamilton, if you've got those quoted as to how much they would charge us for the same blanket of policing that the OPP is giving us, and it's $10 million as opposed to $3 million, we'd really have to look at that. You don't have those numbers. I don't have those numbers. Nobody around this table has those numbers. That's why the motion is asking for a brief and concise examination to get that information. I don't see what's wrong with this, and I'm supporting it. Thank you.
Councillor Gatward, before you respond, Councillor Miller, can I hear you speak?
Just, I will say that we did look at options before. Now, I don't know if it was the previous term of council or the one before that, but I remember that one clearly. The OPP did come in substantially lower. I won't say that I have blind loyalty to the OPP, nor do I have blind loyalty to a local force or any other force. What I do want to see is good policing at a reasonable cost. And from what we went through before, I know that we have a good cost, and it's unfortunate that certain members haven't had a good experience with the OPP. I have to say they've been extremely receptive every time I've contacted them, so I fully support them. And I will say, when we went through this exercise before, it really hurt morale on the force itself. I remember talking to Paul Emerson about that, and the inspector at the time, Dave Durant, and I'm not crazy about throwing out maybe the baby with the bathwater, so I think we can certainly work to make it better, but from my perspective, like I say, the current inspector we have, I think, is doing a bang-up job, especially with her outreach to the different communities, and I've had nothing but good experience, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Councillor Gatward?
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The motion, Councillor Pierce, is that staff be directed to bring forward a brief and concise examination of the following policing options. Now, if we were to choose only option one tonight, I would be quite happy with that. But we're directing staff to do number 2 and 3 as well. And I don't agree with number 2 and 3. I think it's a waste of Mr. Bradley's time, because we all know what's going to come back, in my opinion.
Okay, so, Mr. Mayor, if I could, so we all know, in Councillor Gatward's opinion, what it's going to come back with. I didn't know you were an expert on this, Councillor Gatward. My apologies.
Just look at the expenses and the cost per capita. It's all on the website, Councillor Pierce.
Thank you, Councillor Gatward. Councillor Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A few things I like about this resolution. First of all, it's asking for a brief and concise examination. I think we spent more time tonight than maybe we should be on the details. This discussion should be happening at the October Corporate Development Committee meeting rather than here. It's just asking for a report that's brief and concise and can be done within a month. And I think that's just a matter of due diligence. It's not onerous. The second thing I like about this is it's very clear. The resolution does not impugn or detract from the service, dedication, and bravery of the individual officers. And we're not criticizing the OPP by asking to look at policing, and it's just due diligence. We should do that. And the last thing I'll say is what really concerns me the most, and I'm a little disappointed in this, but this report be brought to the October Corporate Development Committee meeting for consideration. And unfortunately, I'll be in Quebec City during that meeting, and I won't be able to take part in this discussion when it comes back.
Is there any other discussion before we call the vote?
I like a recorded vote.
All right, we'll have a recorded vote. All those in favor of the resolution? All those opposed? Thank you. Councillor Bell?
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Pierce.
Other business first, if I could.
Oh, I'm sorry. Other business, yep.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just very briefly, if I could, and there was, we were speaking of it earlier today with Trillium Way up at the north end of Paris. I don't know if anybody's been by there lately, but the work that's being done on that building is spectacular. It looks amazing, and I can't wait to see another twin building just like it beside it. And the only other business I can say is I want to thank you, Mr. Mayor, for that brief interruption of our meeting earlier, because that allowed us to have some tasty treats, and they were very good, I must say.
Those were from the cat lady. Councillor Miller?
I'd almost make that a motion on those tarts, that's how good they were. I guess a reminder that there's Thursday at 5 o'clock, we have the Salute to Brant at the fairgrounds.
Anything else under new business? Councillor Wheat?
Point of order, Mr. Mayor, when you asked for any additions to the agenda, no one said they had any other business. Should have been listed.
They've just woken up, Councillor Wheat.
Sorry.
Councillor Pierce?
If I may, Mr. Mayor, through you to Councillor Wheat, yes, you are correct in that, but there has been many other occasions where things have come up through meetings for other business, as the tarts did tonight. Thank you.
Okay, number 15.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Pierce, the public council, that Brant County Council convene in camera to discuss a potential disposition of land by the municipality. Brackets, Public Works Committee report, September 10, 2019. Close brackets.
Okay, we're now in camera. Bylaws. Oh. All right. Where do I see the?
First reading, moved by myself, seconded by, is that Brian Coleman? Bylaws.
Oh, my goodness.
Bylaws, items number 1 to 24, first reading. I guess we have to do them one at a time, so that's that.
Yeah.
Probably we call a vote on the first reading.
All those in favor? Yep.
Okay, second reading, moved by myself, seconded by Brian Coleman. Items number 1 through 24.
Are you voting? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Third reading, moved by myself,
Wait a
seconded by...
minute. Councillor Pierce has a question.
Sorry, Councillor Pierce.
He has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A comment, if I could. I don't necessarily need them pulled, but I'm quite happy to see the number of bylaws in here where it talks of the facade improvement programs and such happening in Burford. I think that's great. I know that it was the CIP there was well attended, and it's good to see that that folks are taking advantage of that. And I think that just bodes well for everybody. So that's great news on that. There's like 23, 24 grand, which is, I think it's a good price to pay for what we're going to be getting out of the deal. So I just wanted to comment on that. That's great news.
Great, thank you. Any other comments? Call the vote. All those in favor? Councillor House?
So the third reading, moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Coleman, and noting that bylaw number 127-19 is not included in the third reading.
Okay. Call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. That's it. Next meeting is Tuesday, October 22nd. Move to adjourn. Councillor Chambers.